Chapter 238. Luo Nan and the others had just stepped onto the side road of Fudong Main Street when the shockwave enveloped the area around Frost River Reality. Just as Zhang Yingying had expected, there were no gunmen on the lower floors. The journey down was easy and pleasant, and it took them less than 100 seconds. They even had the time to think about it a little more. With the shadow of the building, they could quietly descend so as not to be too shocking. However, the actions of the Ablatum Knights above Frost River Reality made their cautiousness a joke. Just what is he doing? When Zhang Yingying saw the shockwave that exploded within Frost River Reality and the figure that flew out, her usually jumpy train of thought was somewhat unable to hold on. There was nothing strange about a few gunmen dying right after they opened fire and getting rid of them cleanly. Compared to the few Ablatum Knights, they were not even worth a fart. If I had known that this would be the result, I wouldn't have been so hesitant. I would have just taken action. That's for sure, and Wang's brain has already atrophied, hiss. Zhang Yingying suddenly covered her ears and frowned. Half of Luo Nan's brain was stupefied a bit earlier than her. This was probably the most intense tinnitus he had ever felt in his entire life. It rang loudly, making him suspect that someone had fired a gun right next to his ear. He also covered his ears and couldn't help but grimace. What happened? Shui Lei was originally immersed in the successful high-altitude rapid descent experience, but he was given a fright by Luo Nan's desperate reaction. Bai Xinyan glanced at the two of them, then lowered her head to look at her wristband. She then shrugged. There's a problem with the encrypted channel. On the screen of her wristband, the countdown stopped at 97 seconds. It's the collapse of the psychic wave network. Zhang Yingying recovered from the initial shock and patted her ear lightly. She had a strange look on her face. I haven't had this symptom for a long time. Is the president doing some extreme experiments again? This is the mission process. Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped talking. At this time, Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward the end of the auxiliary road. Shui Lei was a bit hesitant. He raised his head to look with uncertainty. In the end, Luo Nan recovered from his tinnitus state with great difficulty. He blurted out the most crucial words, "Where is he?" In this instant, the brilliant river of stars that Luo Nan used clairvoyance to illuminate was silently extinguished, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. There were only a few dozen stars left, as well as the nebula dust that was even harder to see. Such a strong contrast caused Luo Nan to be stupefied in place. At this time, Zhang Yingying grabbed his arm to make sure that the two of them were a little closer. Then, she looked at Bai Xinyan, and the few of them carefully walked out of the side road. At this time, the night rain had not stopped. The police lights were on, the street lights were on, and the public transport vehicles were also on. Only the buildings behind them were pitch black. The contrast between light and darkness was strong. However, regardless of whether it was in the light or in the dark, there was not a single person within their line of sight. The entire street, the entire building complex, and even the blurry city under the curtain of rain were all empty and devoid of life. If there were strong people, they would be the Ablatum Knights who had just shattered the glass curtain wall. There was also Frost River Reality, where Fairchild and Baze had suddenly engaged in a direct and violent confrontation. There was also the first Ablatum and his subordinates within the three dark clouds at the top of the building. These people took the form of constellations, nebula dust, and appeared on the plane of Luo Nan's mental clairvoyance. Compared to the vast and resplendent star river from before, the sparseness was shocking. Oh, I made a mistake. An inexplicable voice penetrated into Luo Nan's mind, and then the background noise suddenly became rich. A ripple seemed to streak past Luo Nan's eyes. He let out a cry, and his entire body seemed to be electrified. His vision blurred, and the dense starlight and the gloomy void transformed back and forth several times. Only then did it stabilize and return to its normal state of the brilliant star river. However, there were some subtle differences. On the plane of reality, a dense mass of people appeared out of thin air. They rubbed shoulders with one another as they hurried past, submerging the small team of 4. most of the people were far away from this area. They occasionally turned their heads to look at the pitch-black building, revealing expressions of confusion and suspicion. This was the scene that should have happened in reality. But what was that just now? Hey, did you see that? Those Ablatum Knights. They're gone. Zhang Yingying's voice suddenly lowered. It was a bit hoarse. There's also Fairchild and Baze. Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward Frost River reality. There, the impact of the battle had strangely disappeared without a trace. All that was left was the broken outer wall of the building. Luo Nan added in his mind, and the 3 first ablatums on the top of the building. They're on the other side. Bai Xinyan muttered to herself for a few seconds before speaking softly. It's like a legendary technique like spatial fault. They can intercept a segment of space-time and replicate it. Or they can use the projection of the world. I've only heard that there are some extraordinaries who flaunt themselves as gods who possess this sort of nearly inexplicable space-time ability. Spatial fault? Zhang Yingying had heard of this for a long time, but it was mostly in the works of fantasy. She could only spread her hands. Right now, the only known extraordinary in the entire city is the president. Huh? The gazes of the 2 beauties, each with their own characteristics, locked. Zhang Yingying subconsciously reached out to touch her ear. The encrypted channel had yet to be restored, and the chaos of the psychic wave network continued. However, as long as one wanted to understand the situation, one could still use the primitive method of using a wristband. Zhang Yingying began to make calls. She wanted to find someone to clarify things. Fault? Luo Nan, who was next to her, naturally heard the conversation between the 2 women. He blinked, and his consciousness flowed, permeating through the void. The brilliant star river of his clairvoyance was still the same as before. There seemed to be nothing abnormal. However, after the experience he had just experienced, the greatest abnormality was that there was nothing abnormal. Due to the appearance of the spatial fault, the Ablatum Knights, Fairchild, the 3 first ablatums, and the other members of the Order of Justice were all swallowed up. These people no longer existed on the plane of reality. Regardless of whether or not this was the work of that person, this change should be reflected in Luo Nan's mental senses. It was just like when he first entered the spatial fault and instantly sensed the change. However, the reality was that regardless of whether it was Fairchild's magnificent and dazzling constellation, the nebula dust of Baze and the other 8 Ablatum Knights, or the dark cloud formed by the 3 first ablatums, all of them remained within the star atlas. There was just an additional layer of indescribable layers. The reason for this was that although Luo Nan's body had come out, his consciousness, or at least a portion of it, remained within the spatial fault. It carried out the work he was most familiar with. Observation. Luo Nan was simultaneously observing 2 worlds. They were independent of each other, yet they overlapped with each other. A brand new dimension was opened within the 3-dimensional structure of clairvoyance. It was a feeling that defied all human experience. It could only be sensed, but it could not be described. It was extremely bizarre, yet brilliant beyond compare. This was especially true when the 2 worlds, which appeared to be completely identical, overlapped with each other in reality. This gave Luo Nan an additional angle of observation. The dark cloud of dust, which was originally chaotic and unclear, became much clearer. Even though it was still difficult to refine a life sketch in the form of a constellation, it was still possible to draw an outline that was not too different from each other. It was more distinguishable from each other. And so, the dark cloud that affected observation gradually thinned and split apart, revealing the true faces of the 3 first ablatums of the Order of Justice. Soon, Luo Nan found the one with the highest status. It was an old man wearing loose robes. He stood in the middle of the landing platform of Building A. His figure was thin and withered. He looked old and clumsy. Needless to say, this was An Wang. Although he was trapped within the spatial fault, this old man did not show any signs of anxiety. He just smiled and sighed with emotion. Doing things that ordinary people are unable to do is called extraordinary. "Oh Yang, compared to you, I really am old and decrepit. And Weng, you praise me too much. As An Weng spoke, a middle-aged man appeared on the rooftop of the building An Weng was in. He wore a black suit that seemed like he was about to attend a banquet. He stood about 10 meters away from the century-old man and bowed slightly to show courtesy. Chapter 239. Ouyang. President Ouyang Chen. Luo Nan finally understood He Yuan's meaning. No wonder she didn't consider the strong members of the order at all. So she was waiting here. He had never truly seen Ouyang Chen before, but he had heard of this division president who taught ability users with the theory of internal logic, invented the hexaear, and established the psychic wave network. Ouyang Chen's name reverberated like thunder in his ears. Now that he saw Ouyang Chen face to face, he felt that Ouyang Chen's image was quite consistent with his expectations. He didn't feel unfamiliar at all. An Weng and Ouyang Chen were even more familiar with each other. They had both been in Xia City for many years, keeping each other in check. The number of interactions between the two was even greater than the number of members and followers they had. This old man, who was already over 100 years old, raised his head to look at the night sky, which was no different from before. He muttered, "The logic world. I remember that you once discussed a similar concept with me. I was asking for guidance." Ouyang Chen was still modest and low-key. But I refused. And Weng reminisced about the past and was rather emotional. Clergy and researchers are the same. They both yearn for the truth, but we won't place holy objects on the experimental table. We will always have a forbidden zone. Reverence or fear. In short, we must avoid it. But researchers are different. You can trample on the holy domain at any time. Ouyang Chen listened quietly, not refuting. But as an extraordinaire, just by standing there, he made everyone on the landing pad, other than An Weng, feel uneasy. Actually, when An Weng and Ouyang Chen's conversation was transmitted to the other two first ablatums through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao and An Qingli reacted as if they had swallowed a bomb. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and An Qingli groaned. This guy came out of the laboratory. He must have crossed the line. Oh shit. An Weng laughed. Ouyang, my children don't understand you. They don't understand your work. Ouyang Chen's gaze flitted across the complex light diagram around An Weng's body. Just like An Weng, he raised his head to look at the sky, deep in thought. He did not immediately respond. An Weng quickly withdrew his gaze. He was like an old friend, a senior, analyzing Ouyang Chen's actions. You have never been an inventor. You are a theoretical researcher. You grasp a question, and you will research around it until you form a valuable system. For example, when you set up the psychic wave network, others only saw the convenience, but I knew that you were researching the soul, researching mental energy, and researching the existence of the mental plane relative to the material plane. You wanted to figure out where the power that distorted reality came from. Ouyang Chen looked at the old man's mottled face and replied calmly, "This is what I've been pursuing. According to your church, it is the source of the world's revolution." Oh, yes, the gate of truth is open. The fact that An Weng had so easily said the keywords made the two first ablatums' scalps tense. Was it really this old man who had not hesitated to shed all pretense of cordiality with child and pushed for the strategy of repairing the plank road in the open and crossing the Tsang in the dark? I feel like we are all a joke. On Zheng Zhao's side, An Qingli once again contacted him through a private line. There's definitely something wrong with that old man's brain capacity. Or perhaps, he simply doesn't take us seriously. We should think of a way. Zheng Xiao suddenly could not hear anything. This private line of communication had been inexplicably severed. At the same time, an ice-cold and penetrating intent cut through his nerves within the evolution field, slowly grinding them away. An Qingli's situation would only be worse than his. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and then opened them again. There was no doubt that the old man had always known about this private line of communication between him and An Qingli. He just turned a blind eye and let them play around. Perhaps Zheng Xiao should rejoice. Even in private communication, he had never spoken ill of An Weng out of caution. But at this moment, he was not only worried that the old man would dig up old debts, but he was also unable to understand why An Weng had suddenly expressed his attitude in such a frank manner. What was the meaning behind this? Unbeknownst to him, Zheng Zhao's attention turned to the core of the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth. The unbalanced state continued, but Zheng Zhao noticed that the white plate, which had been pressed down to the bottom, had lifted a little at some unknown time. The crite that had materialized on the black plate had also begun to recover its vitality. Then, where was the opposing chaotic element? Zheng Zhao seemed to understand something in a daze, but the pressure on the mental plane had risen once again. It was ice-cold and heavy, making it impossible for his thoughts to go any deeper. The conversation between An Weng and Ouyang Chen was as warm as a spring breeze. No matter what, I can feel your accomplishments. Ouyang, you are attempting to redefine the laws of the material plane. Ouyang Chen shook his head slightly. If such a form truly exists, I hope that it can be reproduced. But up until now, all I have been able to do is create a plausible model, a tiny instance. At the very least, this is a battlefield where I can freely move my hands and feet. It is enough to reduce the impact on the secular world. Look, Fairchild and the others are having fun fighting. While An Weng was speaking, Frost River reality was finally unable to withstand the bombardment of the two powerhouses. The connection between Frost River reality and Building A broke. A large half of the structure fell down. Fairchild and Baiza's figures flew up at nearly the same time, smashing into Building A's body. Immediately, an even more powerful shockwave swept out. The glass walls of over 10 floors above and below were shattered with a loud rumble. Glass flew down like rain, and the entire building seemed to shake. If this was the plane of reality, the casualties of the surrounding citizens would be in the hundreds or thousands. But now, there was not a single person in the building. Even if it was completely demolished, it would not matter. The only thing they had to worry about was the church members on the rooftop. The confrontation between Fairchild and Baize grew more and more intense. Although An Weng had taken the initiative to bring it up, his gaze was focused on Ouyang Chen for the majority of the time. He was extremely focused. An Weng. It really is a very good design. An Weng stared at Ouyang Chen and nodded slightly. You have maintained a very high degree of independence. You are mostly borrowing the existing objects of the material plane. The consumption is not much, and the pressure you endure is not great. It is hard to imagine that this is a flawed product. Ouyang Chen smiled in response. So the possibility of it collapsing due to overload is very small. An Weng does not need to think in this direction. An Weng could not help but laugh when his thoughts were exposed in a single sentence. Ouyang, since you clearly know that this is an unsuccessful work, why don't you continue researching it? Stay in your laboratory and concentrate on it. Ignore the disturbances of society and let it proceed according to the established method. An Weng, I am doing it according to the established method. Chapter 240. The rooftop was silent for a few seconds. An Weng began to shake his head. Ouyang. Ouyang. Your current appearance is far from being as convincing as the results of your experiments. Ouyang Chen maintained his gaze. An Weng. Other than the teachings of your religion, no one can feel your sincerity. An Weng's shriveled mouth opened wide. His surprisingly neat and pure white teeth cracked open into a crack. A low and hoarse laugh came from within. This is nothing. The affairs of the world are not driven by our exchanges. The decisive element is not truth or lies. It lies in the established facts. Ouyang, from the moment you establish the logic world, Xia City will not operate because of our attitudes. Do you want to make a bet? Ouyang Chen seriously considered it for a while. In the end, he sighed silently. I've only cut off the channel to gather chaos elements. I thought that the people at the first level of your order's first ablatums had already abandoned methods such as sacrificial sacrifice. And Wang was still fine when these words were spoken, but the other two first ablatums on the rooftops of the other two skyscrapers looked as if they had been hit in the head with a stick. Zheng Xiao was speechless. He already had a premonition, but he was just suppressing it. Now that he was clear-headed, the impact was much smaller. And Qingli was the one who had truly been hit awake. He cried out involuntarily, "What sacrificial sacrifice?" And Qingli's telepathic thoughts had already cut into the evolution field before his voice faded away. He had never been an idiot. It was just that the consecutive setbacks in a short period of time had caused his mind to not be clear. He received Ouyang Chen's reminder, and looked at the changes in the projection of the scales of truth. The crucial point that he had overlooked before finally appeared clearly. We are in a spatial fault. The two worlds are separated. There are no more panicking citizens. Where does the element of chaos come from? How could he have forgotten such a simple logic? And Qingli's gaze swept over his bewildered subordinates. He then looked at the diagram of light outside his body. Cold sweat poured down on Qingli's body. He wanted to reach out, but he discovered that he was still under An Weng's punitive restraint. He could not even move a finger. But at the same time, the power contained within his body was tightly combined with the diagram of light outside his body. Layer by layer, it was extracted and flowed into the evolution field. Since he was casting a spell, consumption was a must. In addition, An Qingli had suffered a backlash earlier, so he felt rather weak. He wasn't too sensitive to the loss of strength in his body. It was also because of this that he did not realize that the amount of power he had extracted recently had already far exceeded what was required for normal spellcasting. Over half of the magic power he had accumulated over the years had unknowingly been extracted. Without a doubt, all of this power had become the weights on the scales of truth to correct that damned, unbalanced state. More than half of the power had been lost, but the speed of extraction was still increasing. And Qingli couldn't help but curse, "Old man, you're crazy." As the curses rang out, light and shadow fluctuated between the three buildings. The evolution field went from formless to tangible. It appeared in the void, revealing everything. The rest of the symbols and images were nothing. Everyone's attention was focused on the giant scale in the center. The black and white plates, one above and one below, revealed the crucial imbalance in front of everyone's eyes. It could be seen that even though the current situation was still white below black above, the trend was that the white plate was slowly rising while the black plate was slowly sinking. The difference in weight between the two sides was gradually leveling out. Of course, the price was the loss of power from An Qingli, Zheng Xiao, and even An Weng. Why did you choose me? Why did you choose me? And Qingli was unwilling to accept this. The sacrifice of the spellcaster would certainly be shared by all three of them. But the current trend was that he would be the first to fall. Why? It must be known that he was An Weng's grandnephew. He was younger and had a brighter future ahead of him. He couldn't compare to An Weng, but he should at least be a bit stronger than Zheng Xiao, right? Was it because he wasn't a good judge? Was it because he wasn't able to get rid of Luo Nan? As An Qingli was struggling with all his might, Zheng Xiao's telepathic thoughts cut through the evolution field. An Weng, just what kind of substrate did you choose? An Qingli suddenly shuddered, as if he had just woken up from a dream. Yes, who was the substrate? The substrate that had never appeared on the white plate was the one that determined the upper limit of the element of chaos. If the problem with that substrate was lower than the combined power of the three first ablatums, then An Qingli could definitely save it. Just as this thought arose, the image within the evolution field switched. What appeared should be a certain place within the building. That place had just been flattened by the shockwaves of the collision. Fairchild wore a white robe that was still spotless. On the other hand, Baze, who was stronger than Fairchild, was like a runaway rhinoceros. His body was flung into the air as he charged at high speed. He smashed through the glass curtain wall and fell toward the bottom of the building. Baze would not die from the fall from this height, but it was destined that it would be very difficult for Baze to tangle with Fairchild for the time being. As for the other Ablatum Knights, Without bays as a shield, charging forward was meaningless. Fairchild raised his head and looked up. The evolution field just happened to give him a close-up. This ablatum knight clearly sensed the attention of the evolution field. His gray eyes turned to the side and pointed at the dusky void outside the building. His figure suddenly rose in the next moment. He leaped out of the window, stepped on the building, and flew straight up. It would not take him much time to reach the top of the building. Truth above. Whether it was the furious and panic-stricken Chunli or the relatively calm Zheng Xiao, the two first ablatums nearly suffocated after confirming An Wang's intentions. An uncontrollable despair engulfed their souls. It was Fairchild, the powerhouse, who was just below extraordinary. He was the target that An Wang had found. Of the three first ablatums, the strongest was An Wang. However, he was already old. No matter how powerful his mental cultivation was, his fleshly body could collapse at any time. The remaining two added together might not even be able to compare to An Wang. Purely in terms of blood energy, could two An Wang compare to the years of truth? Clearly, they could not. Since that was the case, if they could not gather enough chaos element, the unbalanced state of the scales of truth would truly suck them dry. When that time came, the first one to die would be Chunli. No, no. Chunli's mind was restless. His strength was drained even faster. He tried to call out to his subordinates. Seeing his current crazed appearance, there really were a few trusted aides who wanted to rush over to help. But halfway there, An Wang sighed. He extended his hand from his voluminous sleeves and used his thumb and forefinger to form a triangle. His other 6 fingers crisscrossed to form a seal that corresponded to the evolution field. It doesn't matter if you're stupid. What makes you feel helpless is to expose yourself without the slightest scruple. Chunli's mouth gaped wide open. His eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Just as his eyes were about to tear out, the evolution field's hidden defensive mechanism silently activated. Rays of light crisscrossed over the bodies of several of Chunli's trusted aides. Dark flames rumbled and ignited. From the outside to the inside, from the inside to the outside, they burned through these people. Yet they could not die quickly. Their hands and feet danced amidst their wretched screams. They fused their terror and despair into the flames. The flames reflected in their companions' eyes and penetrated deep into their hearts. The evolution field clearly displayed this scene. The flames soared, but it was as cold as ice. The priests and knights of the order were frozen on the spot. An Wang did not say it clearly, but the meaning behind his words was very clear. The 3 first ablatums added together were no match for Fairchild. But if they used an even more intense method and used even more people to burn their offerings, wouldn't that be enough? On the projection of the scales of truth, the plate was still moving at a leisurely pace. The element of chaos continued to accumulate, but should he hope that it would slow down a bit? Or should it speed up a bit? At this moment, Chunli was truly at a loss as to what to do. He followed the instincts of a first ablatum and prayed to the order's sacred object. But An Wang was above him like a black cloud covering his head. All he received was an emptiness of despair. Who will save me? As long as I can live, anyone is fine. Chunli's body stiffened. His consciousness gradually froze. Only a tiny bit of will to live remained amidst the fear and despair. It was like a flickering flame that continued to struggle. The icy darkness slowly descended. The flame slowly sank, growing weaker and weaker. But when the flame squeezed into the depths of his soul and released its final rays of light and heat in despair, it reflected a strange figure that seemed familiar. Chapter 241. An Wang maintained the special triangular hand seal. Dark flames burned within the triangular cavity, spreading to his palms, upper arms, and gradually covering his chest and abdomen, all the way to his head. He did not look like a piece of charcoal. Instead, he used a more economical method to extract the essence energy from his flesh and blood bit by bit. He ignited it to unleash 120% of his energy. And Wang was like this. Zheng Xiao was more or less the same. With Qingli blocking in front of him, he could maintain his calm for now. But the calmer he was, the more confused he became. For this reason, he used the evolution field to ask Wang, is there a need for this? Aren't we just paving the way for the order to enter Xia City on a large scale? Are we still unable to gain trust at this level? Do we really need to sacrifice the lives of a few first ablatums? And Wang's answer was elusive and hard to fathom. Qingli, this child, only has a clear mind when he is hiding behind someone else. When he spoke of the gate of truth, he asked when and where. This is correct. Only clear concrete information can be considered fundamental. However, the order lacks this right now. So, Wang, you want to verify it? Everything you've done is actually to find this thing that might not even exist? In the end, the order has never verified it, right? Zheng Xiao was unable to continue controlling his emotions. Anyone would find it hard to maintain their calm when they discovered that their life might be squandered on a meaningless conjecture. No, that's not right. No matter what direction it was, he cherished his life. It was just that there were no miracles without a goal. He was not willing to give up even the last bit of hope. And Wang seemed to read his mind, we aren't aimless. Remember the human-faced arachnid? Its source. That corporation that uses money to conceal its strange smell. They want to make medicine out of the human-faced arachnid. What kind of reason is that? Quantum Corporation. The Gate of Truth. Zheng Xiao was speechless for a time. It was hard for him to connect these two elements that did not match. But Wang firmly believed in this point. His will was incomparably firm, we have already lost the initiative. Right now, we must seize this opportunity back without hesitation. Only we have the qualifications to touch the gate of truth. The authority of truth is destined to be held in our hands. Zheng Xiao suddenly understood why he was never able to increase his rank. Perhaps every single one of the 100 people standing at the top of the order was a paranoid lunatic like Wang. He was about to give up communicating, but the unwillingness in his heart made his thoughts throb. Wang. It was also at this moment that the centenarian opposite him used the most efficient method to say to him, pray, child. Pray that the gate of truth. Or, as the Holy Bible says, under the thick clouds, on the island covered in boiling magma, demons carrying chains on their backs pass through the clouds. Order wraps around disorder, and disorder devours order. Perhaps, we will find a corner of the clouds, and there will be a powerful demon that the Holy Bible says will cross the sky and take our place. To hell with the demons. To hell with the Holy Scripture. Holy, holy God, gate, holy gate. In holy devil. Holy evolution. Seize. Demon. In. In the creation God. In of it. In. And. In. And Qingli's thoughts were like a fine thread that could snap at any time. It groaned in the storm. He is more stubborn than I expected. That's good. And Wang was very satisfied with his grandnephew's reaction. On the other side, Zheng Xiao felt a chill in his heart. He sensed something and cast his consciousness toward the center of the evolution field. Unknowingly, the two ends of the scales of truth had formed a horizontal line that was relative to the evolution field's triangular region. 3 first ablatums, 8 ablatum knights, and dozens of priests and knights. Their life force was mixed with the heart of fear and the heart of madness. Together, they fused into a huge amount of chaos element. Especially within Qingli's massive output, at least for the moment, it formed a precious balance with Fairchild. Zheng Xiao opened his mouth but nothing came out. His thoughts projected the last bit of information. But we are still in the spatial fault. And Wang's response was like a placebo. Child. You must be clear. This is an opportunity. An excellent opportunity. As the old man's thoughts became clear, Zheng Xiao suddenly felt his body and soul tremble. With the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth and the three first ablatums as the fulcrum, the three-dimensional structure constructed began to tremble and warp. The intertwining effects of power were too complex. It was hard to observe, but the final wave that formed swept across the material plane of the logic world in an instant. At this moment, Zheng Xiao saw Ouyang Chen. This theoretical number one person of Xia City was frowning. He cast his gaze toward the projection of the materialized scales of truth. This scene did not require An Weng to relay it. All he needed to do was to scan through the spread of the wave and transmit the information back to him. Zheng Xiao gathered even more information. For example, he roughly understood the boundary of the logic world. It was the area where the three high-rise buildings were connected. It had a radius of 1 kilometer or so. But here came the problem. If he was sealed inside, how could he talk about verification? Before he could finish his thought, the frequency of the wave led by the scales of truth could be described as such. A subtle change occurred. Correspondingly, the wave cut into the mental plane. According to the ancient records of the order, the mental plane was like a boundless ocean. It was incomparably vast and incomparably deep. A person's mental consciousness was like a fish. Some could only swim in the shallow waters, while others could swim tens of thousands of meters under the sea. Of course, this was just a metaphor. Metaphors were often miles away from reality. But no matter what, it was extremely difficult to enter the deep sea. The cultivation ancient records of the order roughly divided the mental plane into 5 layers: shallow, intermediate, deep, abyssal, and extreme. Zheng Xiao was the clear oath first ablatum. Even when he was in his best state, he could only sway at the edge of the intermediate zone. But now, following the rapid change in the frequency of the wave, his body and soul trembled violently. It was as if he had warped and mixed into an ugly, monstrous fish. With a sudden plunge, he entered the deep sea that he had never experienced before. He also received the feedback of a terrifying pressure. Zheng Xiao groaned. He felt as if the muscles and bones of his entire body were severely deformed. His soul was even more warped beyond recognition. Amidst the extreme pressure and pain, a wealth of information was transmitted back to him. But he did not even have the strength to receive the vast majority of the information, let alone understand it. Perhaps An Weng could. Could he really? Through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao could faintly sense that An Weng was not having a good time either. Every change in the frequency of the wave led by the holy artifact was an absolute torment to the body of the centenarian. The damage caused was irreversible. This was verification. Verification at the cost of one's life. Oh. Zheng Xiao was not sure whether or not he had heard a sound. Chapter 242. In the end, Zheng Xiao's mind was still clear. The relevant concepts quickly became clear in his mind. You released number 3. He originally did not have the strength to converse with An Weng, but seeing this scene, his mind surged and he actually squeezed out a bit of energy. An Weng did not respond. He probably did not have the time because at this moment, there was an explosion. The edge of Building A's rooftop suddenly collapsed. A dazzling light leaped up from below like a miniature sun. Fairchild stepped out from within the rippling waves of light. He walked with large strides toward the burning An Weng behind the magic array. 20 meters away, Ouyang Chen gently shook his head. Even this subtle movement was caught by Child. He turned his face and stared at the extraordinary who had been a spectator for a considerable amount of time with his gray eyes. Child's deep voice seemed to be able to shake the air on the rooftop. Do you still think this is a laboratory? In a sense, yes, Ouyang Chen calmly admitted. This logic world is my laboratory. How unfortunate. You let someone crazier than you in. Your experiment is bound to be a mess. Fairchild's footsteps did not stop. As he spoke, he crashed into the automatic defensive circle of the evolution field. Gloomy flames burned around his body, but not a single spark could penetrate the white light surrounding his body. Of course, The priests and knights could go forward to stop him, but the people who were immersed in fear and panic could not muster the courage to do so. Fairchild arrived outside the magic array unimpeded. His movements were still crisp and efficient. He extended his hand and shattered the cocoon-shaped diagram of light into fragments that filled the sky. One of the 3 pillars of the evolution field, and it was also the most important one, had been shattered just like that. Correspondingly, the 2 first ablatums on the rooftops of Building B and Building C screamed miserably at the same time, as if they had lost control of high-voltage electricity. The diagram of light around them twisted and collapsed. Zheng Xiao fared slightly better. He had discovered Fairchild rushing to the rooftop in time. He was mentally prepared. Although the backlash was fierce, it was not fatal. However, on the other rooftop, Qingli, who was already out of his wits, was not so lucky. Forcefully entering the depths of the mental plane was already too much for him to bear. The backlash from the collapse of the pillar of the evolution field destroyed his fleshly body in the first instant. The splattered flesh and blood turned into burning torches before they could completely disperse. The pain of his flesh being torn apart and being burned incinerated Qingli's willpower into ashes. He knelt on both knees and then collapsed onto the ground. He rolled around and let out anguished howls, each one weaker than the last. Meanwhile, in Block A, the dark flames around Weng expanded by half a meter. The intensity of the flames had multiplied many times over. His robes and his skinny body were all ablaze. The light of the fire penetrated deep into his body. Through the flames, one could even see the emptiness behind him. But Weng only stood there quietly. He maintained the triangular seal that corresponded to the evolution field. He only raised his face slightly. His eyes were still turbid amidst the flames as they met Fairchild's grey pupils. The moment their gazes met, he opened his mouth slightly and spoke in a weak voice from his already scorched throat, "As long as you yearn for the truth, it will definitely be on both sides of the scale. But there is no need to be at the mercy of chaos." Child stepped forward again and punched Weng's head. The external force of the fist and the internal flames acted at the same time. The old man's head was instantly smashed into fireworks that filled the sky. Child's expression did not change in the slightest when he succeeded in one strike. This was because he knew that the target his fist had shattered did not have much meaning. His fist, which he had yet to withdraw, slightly tightened. An invisible shockwave was launched from the material plane. It charged into the mental plane and penetrated extremely deep. But in the end, he was still a step too slow. Some incorporeal shadow leaped out from Weng's burning body and concealed itself in the depths of the void. Child raised his head and his gaze pointed to the center of the triangle formed by the 3 buildings. It was the void directly above Frost River reality. There, the materialized projection of the scales of truth stood amidst the rolling waves of light. The evolution field had lost its pillar and could completely collapse at any moment. But the projection of the scales of truth still appeared to be stable. This was not just the miraculous effects of the holy object. It was the support of a new power. On the rooftop of Block C, Zheng Xiao could no longer stand. He barely managed to control his body and sat on the ground. He looked down in a daze. Within the distorted and turbulent evolution field, the originally malevolent image became even uglier. Before, he had only seen the occasional insect limb. Now, it appeared before his eyes in a seriously distorted posture. Of course, it was no longer an insect. It was a clear demonic shadow. The slender limbs moved within the waves of light. The demonic body of man and arachnid that was one with one clung to the lower part of the projection of the scales of truth. The 6-eyed demon eye flickered with light. No one knew who its attention was focused on. "Number 3, Zheng Xiao murmured. Number 3 was a human-faced arachnid. The Order of Justice was one of the first powers to clearly set out to search for and utilize the human-faced arachnid. They relied on their first move and accurate information to capture a total of 5 human-faced arachnid clones over the past 10 days. They were arranged according to numbers 1 to 5. After some research and testing, the human-faced arachnid clones devoured each other. There was also a specimen that was sent to the first sacrifice. In the end, only number 3 was left. It was kept at An Weng's place. No one knew what the old man would do. Now, An Weng's head had been smashed by Fairchild's fist. Number 3, who had remained hidden all this time, had revealed itself. Furthermore, it had thrown itself into the collapsing evolution field a step earlier. Zheng Xiao was in a state of confusion. His consciousness, which was still being pulled and controlled by the evolution field, connected with a chaotic and restless power. Human-faced arachnid, number 3. Zheng Xiao instinctively wanted to use the method of controlling the human-faced arachnid to secure the initiative. But in the next instant, he came into contact with a cold and clear plane behind the chaotic power. The information in his consciousness rippled like light waves. The frequency was so familiar. At this moment, Zheng Xiao's hair stood on end. An Weng. Number 3 did not respond. He could see that its 6 demonic eyes and its ugly head were pointing in a different direction at the same time. It was the rooftop of Building B where Qingli was. In the next moment, number 3 suddenly disappeared from the plane that could be sensed. By the time Zheng Xiao relied on his perception ability, which had yet to be completely withdrawn from the mental plane, to lock onto number 3's position, number 3 had already crashed into the depths of the mental plane. Its target was clear. It covered the rooftop of Building B in an instant. Its sharp limbs pierced downwards. Before the attack could land, another demonic figure soared into the sky from the remains of Qingli's body, which was about to be completely burned away. It leaped into the void. Zheng Xiao saw it clearly. It was another human-faced arachnid. The spoils of war hidden away. A consciousness suddenly came to him. It was extremely clear. Even though Zheng Xiao was mentally prepared, he was still so startled that he nearly blurted out, "An Weng." The consciousness flashed. In the depths of the mental plane, the two ugly monsters collided together. Victory and defeat were practically decided in an instant. Number 3, or rather, An Weng, used its nightmarish Caliceri to shred half of the spoils of war. Then it bit down forcefully, completely swallowing the food that was half in its mouth. In the end, it chewed off the head of the human-faced arachnid, which was indistinguishable from each other. The two ugly heads came together and one swallowed the other. The scene of the human-faced arachnid cannibalism had never been as nauseating as it was now. Chapter 243. Disregarding An Weng's actions for the moment, his judgment should be correct. The human-faced arachnid that had appeared on An Weng's body was most likely the spoils of war that An Weng had hidden from the human-faced arachnid hunting operation. Not only did it not provide any help to Qingli, but it also turned the tables on him when he was in his most dire straits. The spoils of war had undoubtedly absorbed the nutrients from An Weng. But compared to number 3, who had devoured many of its own kind, there was still an essential difference. Number 3 should be able to sense this difference. It wanted to escape with all its heart, but it was still a step too late. Not to mention the fact that the nutrients it had just devoured had been completely poured out, it had become a part of number 3. Zheng Xiao could clearly feel the entire process of the human-faced arachnid's devouring. This was definitely not a good experience. If even he was like this, then what about An Weng? Number 3's actions were very much in line with its ugly outer shell and violent instincts. But if An Weng was added to the mix, then the meaning would be completely different. From Zheng Xiao's perspective, perhaps An Weng could be 10 times more vicious than he was just now, but he would never use such a crude method. He was like a beast with low intelligence. An Weng. Child, are you all right? Zheng Xiao was nearly rendered speechless when his own lines were stolen. But the pressing situation forced him to try. An Weng, I can't hold on much longer. You don't need to. Zheng Xiao's meaning was that he hoped to separate his thoughts from the depths of the mental plane. He hoped that he would no longer be bound to the evolution field and the human-faced arachnid. But An Weng's reply was despairing. Child, you are very important. Very important. The evolution field completely collapsed the moment their thoughts intersected. But Zheng Xiao was unable to retract his projected thoughts. It was like a tenacious kite string. One end was connected to Zheng Xiao, and the other end was pulled by the human-faced arachnid that Wang was residing in. It floated in the endless void. This feeling was not unfamiliar. The Order of Justice had long since grasped the method to control the human-faced arachnid. When they conducted experiments, the first ablatums were the controllers. This feeling was very complicated. It was like a combination of walking a dog and flying a kite. Sometimes, the phenomenon of a soul attachment would occur. It was as if one had transformed into a human-faced arachnid and roamed in the depths of the void. Because of his discovery of this phenomenon, Wang had even specially developed an application. It was a faith product, provided to large clients, the source of tonight's chaos, the human-faced arachnid exoskeleton armor. But now, it seemed that there was a deep reason why Wang was so concerned about his little invention. Perhaps he had long since anticipated that there would be a day when he would ride a true human-faced arachnid and dive into the deepest depths of the mental plane. After many days of experimentation, Zheng Xiao was very clear that the depth of the human-faced arachnid's dive on the mental plane far exceeded that of the first ablatums. There were 5 types of depths in the spiritual plane: the shallow zone, the middle zone, the deep zone, as well as the abyss zone and the polar zone. In short, they were known as the 3 zones, 1 zone and 1 zone. Those who were not extraordinaries or those who had specialized in B-class and above would find it very difficult to enter the latter 2 levels. Zheng Xiao's limit was the middle zone, and even with Wang's profound spiritual cultivation, he could only stay in the deep zone. If he wanted to go deeper, he would need the support of a holy artifact and pay a considerable price. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, staying in the deep zone was the most normal thing. It could enter the abyss zone or even the depths of the polar zone at any time. This sort of zone had already been completely cut off from the material plane. It was impossible for any purely physical instrument to detect its existence. In other words, this sort of darksider life form completely followed its instincts in its actions. It had no intelligence to speak of. It would often enter the shallow zone of its own accord because of the temptation of food and react with the emotions and consciousness of people. This gave people the opportunity to capture it. Yes, as long as the human-faced arachnid interfered with an external object, it would inevitably affect the depth of its concealment. The degree of influence corresponded to the depth of the interference target on the mental plane. The closer the depth of the 2 sides was, the smaller the influence on the human-faced arachnid. Zheng Xiao had a general understanding of Wang's current resolute method of doing things. Perhaps he could reduce the influence of the interference to the minimum. He could use the human-faced arachnid's innate talent to search for the gate of truth hidden in the depths of the boundless void. Wang had already begun to move. The marvelous probing waves were transformed by the human-faced arachnid to cut into the deeper depths of the mental plane. Zheng Xiao wasn't too clear about the specific process of probing as a kite string, but there was one thing he didn't understand: why did it have to search on the mental plane? Was the gate of truth nothing more than an illusory spirit? Just as he was puzzled, Wang took the initiative to communicate telepathically with him. "It's a pity, child. I can't pass on my current experience to you. You don't understand how interesting this experience is. What I can tell you is this: don't use the popular analogy of the order to speculate on the truth. The structure of the mental plane, the way the mental and the material interferes, is much more interesting than you can imagine. Of course, I also have to thank Ouyang, thank his laboratory." On the rooftop of Building A, Fairchild turned his face and looked at Ouyang Chen, who had just walked to his side. "How long are you going to let Wang corrupt your laboratory?" Ouyang Chen loosened his bow tie a bit, allowing himself to enter a more relaxed state. At the same time, he became more engrossed. He let out a breath and said softly, "It's true that it's good to reinforce a house when an earthquake is already brewing, but it's impossible to reinforce a city. We need to release a certain amount of energy, and sometimes we even need to detonate it. This is what the laboratory does." Fairchild sneered, You and Wang must get along very well. I used to. Yang Chen did not deny it. Then he asked in reply, Mr. Fairchild, are you not going to provide some information? I know nothing about Wang's plans. I'm talking about the human-faced arachnid. The human-faced arachnid? This darksider life form is more marvelous than we can imagine. Quantum Corporation is one way of saying it. The Society's research is another. Of course, there's also the Order of Justice. Is there a place for it in the ancient records of the Order? Fairchild sank into deep thought. He needed to recall and weigh the pros and cons. However, the development of the situation did not give him much time. Number 3, who was floating in the depths of the void, had already switched frequencies for the 5th time under Wang's control. This time, there were some subtle changes. Wang was not sure what Fairchild saw. He projected his thoughts over with incomparable concentration. However, a more substantial change occurred within Number 3. It occurred in the depths of the human-faced arachnid's inherent chaos. Hua la la sounds rang out, like the trembling of a chain. There was practically no pattern to the random trembling, but this sound that could be sensed and distinguished was itself incompatible with the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. Chapter 244. Wang never rejected order, but he wanted it to be under his control. Right now, all of his energy was focused on controlling the probing of the outside world. He was unable to completely take care of the interior of the human-faced arachnid. Even if he did, it would be useless. Wang had once attempted to sort out the chaotic interior of the human-faced arachnid to form a complete model, but he had failed as expected. This was because chaos was the nature of the human-faced arachnid. It could not be changed. Therefore, he needed to use the kite string that was Zheng Xiao to resist the primal chaos within the human-faced arachnid's body. He needed to maintain his basic rationality so that he wouldn't be completely suppressed by the human-faced arachnid's instincts. But now, Wang had actually sensed the power of order within the human-faced arachnid's body. He had never doubted the results of his research, so the answer was very clear: an external force had joined the fray. Without a doubt, this power came from the spoils of war. That thing had clearly been shattered by the human-faced arachnid's devouring power, but for some unknown reason, it was pieced back together. Chaos was shattered, and it could only become even more chaotic. The fact that it could be pieced back together meant that its chaos was just a disguise, a brilliant simulation. This reminded Wang of the conviction product he had just developed. The little thing was a reflection of his thoughts. He had wanted to spend some time combing through it and collecting more data, but Child's appearance had ruined his initial plan. From that moment on, the development of the situation became more and more ridiculous, and now, it was completely unrecognizable. Simple recollections were meaningless, but clear content could help people organize their thoughts. Following this clue all the way back, Wang finally confirmed that his previous judgment had been wrong. That was definitely not some spoils of war. It was a replica. Perhaps it was a product of faith that he had created. As far as he knew, the current owner of that thing had been replaced by a certain young man. From the taste he had just swallowed, that thing was more advanced than his initial version, to the point that it was almost as if it was the real thing. However, Wang was not surprised. That young man had some kind of unbelievable power of order, and with his special ability, he was able to stop the changes of the unbalanced state, time and time again. Yang Chen should express his gratitude. Otherwise, he might not have had the time to set up the logic world. However, Wang also remembered that the young man should have been isolated from the logic world. What a miraculous little fellow. Of course, it was also infuriating. The deviation in the direction of his mind caused Wang's previous probing efforts on the mental plane to go to waste. He lost that momentary clue that might have led to the gate of truth. However, he did not let emotions like anger take the upper hand. Instead, he directed the probe waves in the opposite direction immediately. Wang performed a self-examination on the human-faced arachnid, locking onto the elements of order that were incompatible with chaos. He seized the opportunity to push back. Any search and probing would be empty talk if the source of interference wasn't disposed of. The vibrating vibrations of the chains grew clearer and clearer. The corresponding information continued to join and combine, finally forming a dark chain. It twisted and stretched, piercing through the interior of number 3's chaotic shell. It radiated countless strands of barbs that seeped into every part of the human-faced arachnid. The situation was much more troublesome than Wang had originally judged. The power of order used this form to declare its invasion of the human-faced arachnid. As for the longer part of the chain, it extended into the depths of the mental plane. Without a doubt, the other end must be contacting that boy wonder. He's called Luo Nan, right? And Wang's thoughts coiled, forming an incorporeal incantation. He had seen Luo Nan's basic information before. He had used the evolution field to lock onto Luo Nan's aura. This was enough for a secret-bound first ablatum. A highly lethal secret spell gradually formed. He would fire it without hesitation the instant he locked onto his target. He would forcefully blast through the barrier between the mental and the material plane, eliminating the worry of the rear. This was not the smartest method, but it was the most straightforward. Even if this would cause his parasitic soul within the human-faced arachnid to enter a dangerously weak state. And Wang's mind extended out along the chain. With the assistance of the human-faced arachnid, the sealed and chaotic void structure of the logic world was no longer able to block it. And Wang originally had no intention of using this ability on the plane of reality. But now, the situation had changed. He roughly remembered the last place Luo Nan appeared before the logic world was erected. He traced the direction of the chain and scanned the plane of reality at the same time. And Wang was confident that he could lock onto his target within 2 seconds. The probing wave smoothly cut out of the logic world. It was hard for Ouyang Chen to control the probing power of the human-faced arachnid. But at this moment, the information that came flooding in from the outside was not the scene of a metropolis. Instead, it was a starry sky that left one in a daze. It was so unfamiliar. And Wang was dazed for only an instant. He soon came to a realization. This was the projection of a certain person's consciousness. He had already made direct contact with Luo Nan. The kid's combat experience seemed to be lacking. He practically had no anti-detection methods in a confrontation on the mental plane. The two sides instantly clashed. Short. And Wang was just about to blast out the secret spell of death, but he had no choice but to stop. He had never imagined that the scene of a person's consciousness could be this vast and majestic. It was true that the power within was practically non-existent. But this kind of performance in itself was an inconceivable achievement. This was just the reproduction of Luo Nan's perception. He needed to trace back to the origin to find Luo Nan's core consciousness. But behind this starry sky scene were the auras of countless living beings. They appeared here in the form of stars. Together, they formed a vast and hazy structure. Plus, the scene formed from Luo Nan's observation and perception was absolutely not just grand. He made full use of the mental plane, including the reality of the logic world. The starry sky looked flat and uniform as a whole, but it actually contained complex and warped details. It was like a maze. As for Luo Nan's core consciousness, it was hidden behind layers upon layers of curtains. It was hard to discern its location. If Luo Nan had truly used his power to forcefully construct the scene, and one could have charged in all directions and relied on feedback to find his target. But in the pure domain of perception, the more one searched, the easier it was to be led by the nose. Also, the environment here was simply like a fragrant soup pot for the human-faced arachnid. Its powerful and terrifying instincts began to stir once more. This diluted Wang's power. And Wang made a prompt decision. He gave up on probing the plane of reality. He didn't want to waste any more time. He still had the chain. The power of the heavily chained crow was increasing. It had a restraining effect on the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. It made number 3 feel uneasy. And Wang simply strengthened number 3's instincts in this aspect. He let number 3 search in reverse along the chain. No matter what, the master of this chain was undoubtedly Luo Nan. Huh? Number 3's probing suddenly came to a halt. This was because at this moment, an absolutely oppressive feeling came whistling from the other end of the chain. The sudden increase in pressure turned the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid into a pot of boiling oil. If the human-faced arachnid possessed consciousness, its boiling instincts would certainly drive it to scream loudly, "Danger! Danger!" A terrifying power of the same origin but different descended with a rumble. Number 3's combat instincts were pushed to their limits. A battle across space erupted in an instant. And Wang's control suddenly fell to its lowest point before the boiling instincts of the human-faced arachnid. He was like a small boat bobbing up and down amidst the roaring lava. He could capsize at any time. The situation was out of his control once more. He suddenly understood. The one at the other end of the chain was absolutely not Luo Nan. It was a damned human-faced arachnid. An extremely powerful one. Chapter 245. The instantaneous spatial perception was quite clear. The distance between the two human-faced arachnids was extremely far. At the very least, it far exceeded the limits of the normal senses between human-faced arachnids. In other words, this was a collision that should not have occurred. Then was this a trap? A trap specifically targeted at the human-faced arachnid, a trap targeted at Wang? Before Wang could understand the root cause of the change in the situation, the clash between the human-faced arachnids had already entered a white-hot state. The hazy starry sky was filled with the powerful pressure of hostility. Number 3's body was forcefully warped. Every movement was an all-out confrontation between tangible and intangible forces. For this reason, the chaotic power within number 3 revolved at a higher speed. It was like a boiler, crushing and incinerating all internal fuel in order to provide an even more powerful internal energy. From Wang's perspective, this was simply a calamity. After he abandoned his fleshly body, his soul was placed within number 3's body, achieving a partial fusion. But in the end, they had not completely fused as one. There was still a considerable portion, the most crucial portion of his intelligence, that remained independent. After boiler number 3 was activated, nearly a tenth of Wang's soul region had evaporated in a few short seconds. Many of his memory materials had been wiped out in an instant, causing him to be slightly dazed. Only when Zheng Xiao, who was affected, let out a blood-curdling scream did Wang suddenly wake up. The kite string was about to break. How could the chain still be so sturdy? A self-mocking thought flashed through Wang's mind. He forced himself to forget the imminent threat of death. He poured his own power into the chain in an attempt to control number 3 and break free from it. The heavily chained crow was the only channel to contact the two human-faced arachnids. It was also the main battlefield where the two human-faced arachnids clashed. If Wang wanted to destroy the clash, breaking the chain was the most effective method. With Wang's help, number 3's power suddenly rose by a level. Her 8 limbs plucked at the void, moving with all her might in an attempt to go against the chain. The heavily chained crow became perfectly straight. The pulling force and the opposing force acted at the same time, causing the shaking of the chain to intensify. The vibrations of the chain connected into one, and finally turned into the sharp, wang wang, sound of a rubber band on the verge of collapse. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. The more intense the clash between the human-faced arachnids, the more terrifying the internal pressure of boiler number 3 became. The domain of Wang's soul continued to be corroded, but he still needed to accelerate the process to ensure the output of number 3's power. This was the stupidest kind of consumption, but in a rush, Wang had no other choice. At this moment, Wang felt that he and the heavily chained crow were like two burning sticks of gunpowder. It was a matter of who would burn to the end first, ignite the explosives, and explode. The truth is above. Buzz. The prayer and the trembling occurred at the same time. Another wave of collision exploded on the chains. The powerful impact finally broke through the limits of the heavily chained crow, causing it to suddenly lose its special structure and collapse with a hum. 03's body suddenly stopped as the chain was broken. However, Anweng was not happy at all. At this moment, the area of his soul had shrunk to 2/3 of its original size. A large amount of memory material had been annihilated. Even with his tenacious will, he appeared to be in a trance for a while. In addition, in the final clash of power, Anweng no longer had the strength to protect other areas. Zheng Zhao's kite string had also been severed. 03 floated in the hazy starry sky. Starlight filled the sky, but there was no longer any clear trail to guide it. It was as if it had lost its way in the starry sky and had lost its direction. Anweng caught his breath and sorted out the area of his soul that had become a mess. He also tried to use this opportunity to increase his control over 03. However, just as his soul area was gradually spreading towards the chaotic area of 03, the internal pressure of the boiler number 3, after a short period of cooling, ignited with a rumble. Anweng forcefully endured the pain of being roasted by poisonous fire, ensuring that his heart was clear. However, his mind still sank heavily. 03 slowly turned its body. Its instincts were restless again, and it was even more intense than when it was in the fierce battle earlier. At this moment, Anweng heard a kind of fine low-pitched sound. It was like the background noise that existed in a big city at all times. It was faint and undetectable, yet everywhere. If one were to look closely, they would be able to see a lot of messy information. Amidst this faint noise that was hard to ignore, the shadow was like a muddy river that silently flowed past. A huge and ugly body floated out from within. Its limbs were spread out, and its demonic eyes flickered. When it first appeared, it was at the side of 03. When its crooked and bent body completely floated above the shadowy water, it was already in front of 03. Through 03. Anweng locked onto his target from number 3's perspective. This human-faced arachnid was clearly a size larger than 03. Its body was more solid as well. The powerful pressure that assaulted its face made it hard for 03 to suppress its restlessness. 03's instincts should lean towards fleeing, but in the end, it chose to stay in this star field. This had nothing to do with courage. The reason for this was the incorporeal power of order. It had been placed into this hazy starry sky, turning it into a strange cage. Even though it was boundlessly vast, the two human-faced arachnids had already locked each other firmly. Only when victory and defeat were decided, when life and death were decided, would this be the final conclusion. It was that mysterious chain. It seemed to have collapsed, but in reality, it had turned from being tangible to incorporeal. It had used an even more inconceivable form to arrange order. It had displayed an inescapable coercive power. Just as Anweng understood this clearly, the human-faced arachnids had already begun fighting again. The human-faced arachnids were not like intelligent life forms. They did not speak nonsense. Under the urge of their instincts, both sides activated their charging mode and collided with each other. Number 3's left commissary were bitten off by the powerful arachnid in just a single exchange. The powerful arachnid swallowed the commissary into its stomach. Number 3's sharp limbs on the same side stabbed into the side of the arachnid's humanoid body. The wound sizzled and burned. Bloody flames soared. The two human-faced arachnids let out soundless roars of pain at the same time. But this kind of direct wrestling mode did not change at all. It was as if they had returned to the ancient Colosseum. They used the most bloody form to please others. Then at this moment, who was the one they were trying to please? Anweng strove to maintain a clear line of thought during the confrontation between the human-faced arachnids. The changes in the chain displayed the exquisite switching of the power of order. This was absolutely not a spontaneous change. At the very least, there was a frame that encompassed this starry sky. Who did the frame belong to? Anweng knew the answer. But in the face of this hazy starry sky, even with his experience and ruthlessness, it was hard for him to come up with a suitable method to lock onto the person behind the scenes. Unless Number 3's body trembled violently once more. It was at a complete disadvantage in this wrestling. Right now, half of its ugly face had been bitten off by the powerful arachnid. It had lost half of its 6-colored demonic eyes. Its aura was rapidly weakening. There was no chance of victory if this continued. And Wang only used 1/10 of a second to make a final judgment. The corresponding choice did not take up too much time. His mind reflected internally. A gloomy round bead appeared within the area of his soul. The bead was covered densely with strange and bizarre patterns. This was the secret curse of death that he had formed in order to kill Luo Nan as quickly as possible. Right now, An Weng did not hesitate at all. His soul strength crushed over, shattering the secret curse. A fatal negative energy swept through the area of his soul. The pain of his mind was indescribable with words. But he could use a similar method to vent it. His mind surged and he roared loudly on the mental plane. Chapter 246. An invisible wave swept across the starry sky, spreading far and wide. At An Weng's side, he still understood the true meaning of the fluctuations. Expanding another circle, only pure power was exposed, pushing outwards layer by layer. Under the effect of this power, the starlight that filled the sky was like candlelight in a gale, about to be extinguished. In fact, no stars could be destroyed. This hazy starry sky was nothing more than a projection of Luo Nan's perception. It was purely a picture of information. What An Weng was doing now was using the probing waves to sort out the veins within, following the path of the projection and pouring the relevant information back into the material plane. The blessing of the projection of the scales of truth, the information of the deadly secret curse, and the instincts of the human-faced arachnid merged together. Its penetrative power was incomparable. Whether it was the logic world or the scene of Luo Nan's consciousness, none of them were able to isolate it. The probing waves pushed forward layer by layer, and they soon received results. In the material plane, in the metropolis, the flames of life flickered. There was no actual damage, but within the area of influence, there was information that resembled the ravings of hallucinations. It flowed into the tens of thousands of people. The vast majority of the information would be unconsciously filtered out by people. A small portion would form a relatively clear consciousness, but it would be ignored due to the lack of corresponding information. Only a limited few pieces of information would touch upon those with keen senses, who were familiar with Luo Nan, and form an instinctive reaction, forming feedback. Although it was limited, it was enough. "Nanster, is someone calling you?" Shui Lei turned his head in all directions, but couldn't see anything. He was quite puzzled for a moment. Luo Nan went, "Oh," but he didn't respond. He continued to look up at the sky. It was unknown when the autumn rain that had fallen for the middle of the night had stopped. The power supply at Frost River Reality had yet to be restored, and the evacuation of the trapped citizens was nearing its end. The sounds of people gradually grew sparse, making the night seem as dark as ink and the shadows of the buildings dim. The clearing of the outer region was almost complete. The sniper point at Yulan Hotel had just been confirmed to be cleared. The members of the association all went to the street where the Yulan Hotel was located. This was currently the command center for the government and the military, and it was also the most well-informed place. The military ships slowly entered the airspace above, representing the military's full involvement in the incident. The warship was floating above the city. This was a rare sight, and it attracted a large number of people to watch and point at it. Although Luo Nan's gaze was also looking up, it was directed at the area of Frost River Reality. The profoundness of the logic world was reflected in the pitch-black cluster of high-rise buildings, behind the void where the naked eye could not see. Shui Lei didn't receive a response, so he didn't think much of it. He imitated Luo Nan and raised his head to look at the conjoined building complex in the distance. But no matter how he sized it up, he was unable to see anything. He could only scratch his head. The way of the world right now is really evil. With his own strength, he could casually create a space to use. It's no wonder why Hall Master Zhang said that if one isn't able to adapt to the changes in one's cultivation, one would be eliminated as soon as one awakens from it. Their gazes were also directed at the association members. The vast majority of the onlookers were still at a loss over the circumstances of the sudden disappearance of the large group of terrorists. Luo Nan and his group had already obtained a clearer answer. Papercut did his best to widen his eyes and mumbled, "So it turns out President Ouyang is watching." Logic World? The association didn't hear anything about it before. You've tricked them so badly. I'm just taking advantage of the situation. Red Fox was the only member of the association who made direct contact with Ouyang Chen tonight. He more or less had to bear the responsibility of explaining. He shot a glance at Luo Nan and sneered, "If you want to set rules for others, how can you do it without bringing out the momentum of a thunderbolt? The logic world is erected with full explosive power. I really want to see the faces of those orders." As he spoke, Red Fox's gaze stopped on Luo Nan's face. Even with Ouyang Chen's judgment of being ignorant and the repeated verification of reality, Red Fox could not help but want to test the young man's introverted and immature performance after true contact. "Do you see anything?" Luo Nan raised his head to look at the sky, not reacting at all. Shui Lei coughed to remind Red Fox, but he didn't receive a response. He could only reach out and poke Red Fox. It was as if Luo Nan had just woken up from a dream. He turned his head to scan his surroundings. He Yueyin was the society's full representative right now. She was communicating with the government and the military. She was so busy that not even her shadow could be seen. Bamboo Pole had followed her as a technical member. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan had gone to the military security vehicle. It was unknown what they were up to. Cat Eyes said that she was very tired and went to find a place to daydream. Only Shui Lei remained by his side. Red Fox's gaze pointed at Luo Nan. It was hard to avoid awkwardness when Luo Nan and Red Fox met each other after such an intense conflict had occurred. Luo Nan had no experience in dispelling this. Shui Lei could not help either. Luo Nan could only blink. "What did you say?" Red Fox did not get angry. He just pointed in the direction of Frost River reality. "You are proficient in mental senses. You can see things more clearly than us. What's going on over there? Can you tell me?" "You're not looking." "No, I saw a bit earlier." Luo Nan was quite used to this sort of matter-of-fact attitude. He thought for a moment and said, "It's a precise structure that interferes with the mental plane and the material plane. It's like the shield of truth, but it's very different. It really isn't the same." Red Fox was a bit unable to continue facing Luo Nan's bewildering logic. He could only laugh dryly. Most of the manifestations of extraordinary powers are like this. He gave Luo Nan face this time. He did not let Luo Nan blurt out the word nonsense. Luo Nan was speechless for a time. He was not stumped by Red Fox's question. It was just that the results of clairvoyance were far too complicated to describe with words. Plus, the results of his clairvoyance were a sort of correction to his previous understanding. From Luo Nan's previous understanding, the mental plane was a sort of deep multi-layered structure. It was like countless curtains stacked together. The layers were distinct. The closer one was to the material plane, the thicker the curtains were. And the lowest part was connected to the material plane. They interfered with each other. The degree of interference depended on the magnitude of the applied force. Therefore, interference between the mental and material planes occurred on everyone. It was just that the interference of ordinary people was negligible. It could be ignored. The interference of ability users was much more obvious. The Shield of Truth was the most powerful and clearest interference method that Luo Nan had ever seen. It was what he believed to be the benchmark of interference between the mental and material planes. As for Rui Wen, her soul and fleshly body were as one. It was a different situation. It was incomparable. However, the interference of the logic world shattered Luo Nan's understanding that he had just formed not too long ago. Under the senses of his clairvoyance, the multi-layered curtains of the mental plane rolled down together. They no longer possessed the sense of layers. Instead, they overlapped and warped, even tearing apart. Some of them were originally quite a distance away from the material plane, but they forcefully converged together. Because of this, the lower layers of curtains even had an interference effect, twisting into a ball. This was the third state of the relationship between the mental and material planes that Luo Nan had seen. It was also the most complicated one. Chapter 247. Through a complicated method of interference between the spiritual and material planes, Ouyang Chen achieved the peeling off of the material plane's surface layer. Virtual and real interacted with each other, constructing a spatial fault that resembled the real world. The rules and regulations inside were no easier than building a skyscraper. Delving into the details would only exhaust one's mind, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Luo Nan was just looking at the general situation. He didn't continue to get tangled up. Far too much information was involved in explaining these things to Red Fox. A good portion of it was Luo Nan's personal comprehension. Right now, he lacked confidence in his ability to express himself with words. It was difficult for him to speak for a time. Just as he was pondering how to respond, the sound of a car came from behind him. Luo Nan was just about to turn his head to check when his neck tightened. Someone had already grabbed him by the back of his collar and forcefully dragged him over. His back smashed against the lower edge of the car. "Stop talking nonsense and get in the car." Zhang Yingying popped her head out of the carriage and urged impatiently. The vehicle she had transferred over should be a military security vehicle. It was rather large, and the rear compartment was enclosed. It would not be a problem for it to carry dozens of people. What's so urgent? Luo Nan thought that there was another mission, so he didn't bicker with Zhang Yingying. He nodded toward Red Fox and boarded the carriage first. Behind him, Xue Lei, the Red Fox, and the others also came up one after another. However, very soon, everyone was a little confused. The situation inside was a little different from what they had imagined. The space was relatively narrow, and it was densely packed with all kinds of equipment. It seemed a little crowded after a few people came in. Go to the hospital. Bai Xinyan had just taken off her trench coat and changed into a white doctor's coat. She even put on sterile gloves. She looked like she was about to go all out. Luo Nan was stupefied for a moment. Zhang Yingying, who was next to him, simply took off his clothes. She pulled off his outer cover and lifted his underwear. Wow! Xue Lei sighed. There were so many people in the car. Luo Nan's face heated up. Hey! Zhang Yingying didn't care about this at all. Her fingers dug into Luo Nan's undergarments, and she even impudently stroked the lines of muscles on his back and waist. You might be an F-rank disabled candidate, but you actually aren't particularly skinny and weak. Her soft and smooth fingertips streaked across. The sensation was warm, but it caused Luo Nan to quiver and shiver. He even forgot to speak the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Judging from his body fat percentage, his physique isn't any worse than his peers. However, compared to soul energy, it's nothing. Don't move. Bai Xinyan shouted at Luo Nan to stop the writhing and struggling Luo Nan. She connected the wires of the apparatus to various parts of Luo Nan's body. In this way, Luo Nan was embarrassed to move even if he wanted to. He could only obediently allow Zhang Yingying to completely remove his clothes. He asked helplessly, "What exactly do you want?" Acting cool is fun for a moment, but in the blink of an eye, it's the crematorium. I'm here to bring down your fever. Zhang Yingying temporarily took on the role of nurse. She felt that it was very interesting. She used her finger to poke and poke at Luo Nan's body. She played quite happily. Bai Xinyan saw that Luo Nan's body temperature was rising. She didn't allow Zhang Yingying to tease him any further. She began to adjust the apparatus and explained, "No one knows when the effects of the shield of truth will disappear. And right now, the amplification of your soul strength is quite dangerous. One mistake and the two sides will collide. You won't even have the chance to save yourself. So, you need to be under observation for 24 hours. No matter how good the equipment here is, it's still better to be at the hospital. Luo Nan laughed bitterly. It can't be that serious, right? Just prepare for the worst. Bai Xinyan's tone was light, but in her heart, she was already certain that the trouble that awaited them would not be small. This could be seen from the fate of the first 2 generations of the Luo family. Moreover, the problem of the imbalance of body and soul was not the only problem. Red Fox's brows furrowed before Papercut's voice fell. He subconsciously extended his hand and pressed his ear. His gaze flickered toward Luo Nan. Xue Lei, who was at the side, saw his actions and exclaimed, "Did you hear it too?" Red Fox indicated for him to be quiet, then he made a few gestures toward Papercut. After the logic world was established, the psychic wave network entered a state of paralysis. It had yet to recover, and the secret communication between them was far less convenient than before. Fortunately, Papercut could understand. He quickly nodded, closed his eyes, and sensed for a moment. Then his expression turned grave. The spirit summoning technique? Yeah, the spirit summoning technique. Bai Xinyan sighed, which was rare for her. I don't know what trouble your boss Luo has stirred up. And Wang is clearly trapped in the logic world. His situation is terrible, but An Wang still tries to use this method to lock onto An Wang's position regardless of the cost. Plus, he's almost succeeded. The gazes of everyone in the car turned toward Luo Nan. Luo Nan had nothing to say. He could only wear the apparatus and wires on his body. He acted like a puppet, allowing others to do as they pleased. The door to the car opened again at this time. Cat Eyes, who had gone into a daze just now, boarded the car. Bai Xinyan said, Sister Nun and Bamboo Pole will move together with the military. Now that everyone on our side is here, there's no need to delay. No matter who we're facing, it's always best to distance ourselves. The car suddenly increased in speed as they spoke. Soon, they left the conjoined building complex behind. The group of people was basically retreating from the battlefield. 2 minutes passed, and the group exchanged glances. The range of the spirit's summoning technique should be out of range by now. The group of people let out sighs of relief. They no longer needed to pay attention to the intermittent shouts in their ears. Right now, the straight-line distance between the security car and Frost River reality was over 10 kilometers. Even the secret-bound First Ablatum would find it hard to reach, let alone An Wang, who was separated by a layer of the logic world. However, Luo Nan was not particularly optimistic. He did not have any hopes that An Wang would be able to remove the pressure from An Wang just by moving the car. For the current An Wang and even for Luo Nan, distance was not something that held much significance. The intertwining of the many layers of curtains of the logic world caused distortions to appear in the distance on the mental plane. In a situation where the distance on the material plane remained the same, a misalignment appeared between 2 points on the mental plane. It was like the overused example of spatial folding. Space was like a piece of paper. The 2 ends were far apart, but when the paper was folded, the originally long distance would become within reach. Luo Nan did not merely observe this special structural pattern. In fact, Luo Nan immediately discovered a flaw and opportunity after An Wang ordered the human-faced arachnid to swallow the high imitation within An Qingli's body. Through the heavily chained crow, Luo Nan used the Wraith sign, which was located far away in a secret location of the Blood Flame Order, to establish a connection with the Order of Justice's human-faced arachnid. Luo Nan used the characteristics of the logic world to take advantage of the situation to construct a colosseum, or perhaps an altar. Luo Nan used the format pyramid as a foundation to erect the framework of the altar. This was something Luo Nan was already familiar with. It did not take any effort at all. The only difference this time was the span. What Luo Nan could use, An Wang could use as well. The existence of the logic world had severely distorted the mental plane, but it could not stop An Wang's evil thoughts. When the evil thoughts attacked, strangely enough, the projection of the scales of truth floated in Luo Nan's mind, especially the pair of black and white plates floating up and down. A familiar whisper seeped into Luo Nan's mind. As long as one yearns for the truth, there will certainly be two sides of the scales. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Chapter 248. Luo Nan's senses were extremely subtle. In the past, when he erected the framework of the altar, he could always transcend the world and not be directly affected by the sacrificer, only receiving the relevant benefits, as long as he could bear it. But now, Weng's evil thoughts had attacked and the projection of the scales of truth had inexplicably entered. That feeling of being high and mighty had been offended. The frame of the sacrificial altar he had propped up had also been eroded and collided with by external forces. This had never happened before. In the order of justice, the scales of truth were a supreme holy relic. It was equivalent to a sacrificial tool and could be considered a framework for the altar. Weng had already been placed on the scales of truth, which meant that he was the sacrificial object of the scales of truth. One object could be used for two purposes. Their goals were different, and their natures were different. Conflict was inevitable. And what Weng was doing right now wasn't just letting the two frames collide together. Weng's malicious intent had locked onto his target. He clearly wanted to pull Luo Nan into the depths of the maelstrom. It seemed like he had succeeded. Luo Nan tried to expel the projection of the scales of truth from his mind, but it was useless. This toy grew clearer and clearer, especially on the side of the white plate. It seemed to possess a soul-stealing power that pulled at his mind. It was unavoidable. Upon closer inspection, it seemed to be related to the structural model of the shield of truth. As a result, his body was somewhat tightened, as if he had been tied up by invisible strings. Luo Nan struggled a bit uncomfortably, but he never thought that the equipment outside his body would immediately sound an alarm. The gazes of everyone in the car suddenly converged on him. Zhang Yingying, the temporary nurse, immediately raised her hand high. I didn't do anything. Even if you want to do it, you can't. Bai Xinyan was using the AR image to integrate the data from the instrument. All kinds of graphics and data were arranged in different levels. Those who were not experts would feel their eyelids twitch. However, at this time, everyone could see that in the left region, on a nearly flat wavy line, there was a series of subtle fluctuations. The strength of my body has changed, although the change is very small. Bai Xinyan's gaze turned and swept past Luo Nan's face. The shield of truth hasn't cracked, right? I'm not too sure about that. Luo Nan reached out to scratch his cheeks. He was a bit embarrassed. Although this matter was confidential and couldn't be discussed in detail, he didn't pretend to be a hero. Instead, he showed an uncertain attitude. Bai Xinyan raised his eyebrows slightly, but before he could say anything, Zhang Yingying had already slapped his shoulder again. You don't know. What do you mean by unclear? It's not my problem. In fact, it was. Having fallen to this point, Luo Nan had to admit that he had gone too far. Right now, Luo Nan could already sense the existence of a powerful source of heat beside him. That familiar sense of order was undoubtedly Fairchild's. Luo Nan combined the situation within the logic world with the memory fragments of Qingli that were gathered from the high imitation. Luo Nan made a judgment that made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Perhaps, like Child, he had been killed first by Weng and sent to the scales of truth to be used as a counterweight. Would he also be placed on the altar and become a sacrifice one day? How ironic. The transcendental feeling of constructing the framework of the altar had caused Luo Nan to lose his accurate judgment. Even if Weng had swallowed the bait himself and bumped into him, the Wraith Signs level still had the advantage. His eagerness to hunt attitude was too frivolous. After the predicament of near collapse, Weng immediately used a ruthless and decisive response to give Luo Nan a good lesson. If Luo Nan's guess was correct, Weng should have seized the moment when Fairchild blessed him with the shield of truth. He used the secret technique of the order, which Luo Nan did not understand, to succeed in one fell swoop. And things would not end here. Right now, Luo Nan seemed to have replaced characters like Fairchild and Ouyang Chen. He had become An Weng's #1 target. Even Luo Nan himself was intoxicated by An Weng's ability to draw hatred. Naturally, the most urgent task was to get the situation back on track. Whether it was President Ouyang or Fairchild, had those two been idle for too long? Maybe An Weng was exerting his strength against Fairchild, and he ended up bringing disaster to the fish in the moat. Everyone could see that Fairchild had blessed Luo Nan. Papercut furrowed his brows and guessed. He was immediately on the right path. Red Fox spoke in a deep voice, or it could be a direct target. It's like hitting a cow across a mountain. Zhang Yingying reached out to point at Red Fox. She was in great agreement. That's right. Then let's take defensive measures first. Right now, there are no conditions. Bai Xinyan shook her head. She raised her wristband to make contact with the outside world. Soon, she connected. Sister, your boss has the ability to stir up trouble. Even a layer of the world can't stop him. I suggest that you urge President Ouyang to end this battle quickly. Luo Nan's head hung down. He really did not have the face to see anyone for a time. However, he would not be distracted by the mundane plane for too long. He could not completely rely on others to help him. His mind quickly focused back on the altar frame. He could not relax for even a moment on An Weng's side, even if An Weng was weakening at a visible speed. There's not much time left. An Weng was very clear about his own state. In the beast fighting arena, half of number 3's limbs had been devoured by the bite. Number 3's expression was dispirited, and she had no strength to fight back. An Weng's soul region trembled and shrank. Only half of its peak remained. The rest was torn apart and diverted by the two vortexes. The beast fighting arena was secondary. The projection of the scales of truth was the main target. Since Luo Nan was placed on the scales of truth, he could only be on the side of truth. An Weng had to keep up with the scales of truth, but Luo Nan's weight was absolutely extraordinary. He and Fairchild merged together, causing the projection of the scales of truth to slide into an unbalanced state in an instant. An Weng's mind grew colder and calmer the more dangerous it was in this moment of crisis. It was like the projection of the scales of truth. It was clearly illusory, but it possessed the dignity of a holy object. It possessed the root of immortality. For a short period of time, An Weng could withstand this method of burning his soul. He could even obtain an even stronger tension and achieve an even better result. Bang! It was as if a bowstring had been plucked with force. A probing wave swept across the deep space in the instant the sound rang out. It was more tyrannical and penetrating than any previous wave. In this instant, the logic world and the hazy starry sky were practically transparent to An Weng. His consciousness spread to every nook and cranny of the void, to every level. Accompanying the transparency was a layer of fog that floated up. This was the phenomenon formed when the probing wave touched the material plane and interfered with each other. Too much of this mist had probably accumulated. Soon, the night sky of the logic world became a bit turbid. Bang! Another rumbling sound rang out, and the visibility of the logic world dropped by another chunk. It was as if a great fog had descended. The three skyscrapers seemed to be warping in the curtain of night. Ouyang, Fairchild and the projection of the scales of truth still had some telepathic connection. He could also indirectly touch upon An Weng's state. An ominous omen arose for a time, and he warned Ouyang Chen. Before Ouyang Chen could respond, a bolt of lightning and fire suddenly leaped out from the upper layers of the hazy mist. The glaring forked trajectory was like a heavenly tree that had been cut down. It smashed down. Why was it smashed? Chapter 249. The moment the giant arms smashed down, the seemingly real night sky of the logic world seemed to collapse. Space warped and shook, transforming into fine waves that could be clearly felt. The waves spread across everyone's skin, causing a majority of them to shiver. A corresponding chill emerged from the bottom of their hearts when the projection of the scales of truth at the center of the three buildings suddenly distorted. Its light dimmed and the shadow of the giant arm swallowed it. The illusory projection was clearly unable to obstruct it. The shadow of the giant arm wrapped in lightning rushed down and struck the ceiling of Frost River reality. Even now, there was no visible pause. There was not even a particularly strong impact. It was simply like a corrosive acid that penetrated from the ceiling to the bottom. In the blink of an eye, a penetrating wound over 30 meters in diameter was torn open. Then, ripples of vibration spread from the crack in all directions. Frost River reality completely collapsed and collapsed. It was only at this moment that a terrifying sonic boom rang out. The glass walls of the three skyscrapers, regardless of whether they were facing Frost River reality or not, were blasted to pieces. The lightning and fire surrounding the giant arm flowed and sputtered. The exploding beams of lightning were like countless living snakes. They leaped into the three surrounding Great Xia buildings and wantonly flew about. Baze, who had just been knocked to the ground floor by Fairchild, just happened to climb to the bottom of Frost River reality. He watched as Frost River reality collapsed and the lightning and fire closed in. Without a word, he crashed into the inner layers of the building. He rolled and dodged, but in the end, he was not stuck. Baze's reaction was fast and his luck was pretty good. However, others might not be like him. There was an Ablatum Knight who was in the direction of Frost River reality. Misfortune befell him. The chaotic lightning and fire just so happened to surround him. He could not avoid it. When the lightning touched his body, he wanted to use his painstakingly cultivated extraordinary strength to resist. However, in an instant, his sturdy torso was affected by an unimaginable force. His limbs were greatly distorted. It was as if a pair of demonic hands were kneading him like a meatball. He was kneaded into a badly mangled ball of flesh and blood as he tumbled about in the destroyed building. The most terrifying thing was that this person did not die quickly. Muffled screams burst forth from the ball of flesh. They were bitter and desperate. Even a powerhouse like Baze's face turned black when he saw this scene. He did not look back as he crashed into the depths of the building. He wanted to get as far away from the lightning as possible. That's not lightning, at least not the pure kind. Luo Nan could roughly see that the source of this wave of electricity was the same as the mist created by An Weng's probing waves. It originated from the intense interference between the mental and material planes. There was no pattern to this kind of interference. It was chaotic and violent. Coupled with the powerful ionization effect of lightning, this was the final result. But then again, this scattering of electric light covered a diameter of nearly a kilometer. How powerful was the corresponding soul power that acted on the physical plane? Using himself as a standard, he was stronger than 10,000 times. Or 100 million times. That wasn't realistic. Even the unfathomable and unfathomable President Ouyang Chen gave Luo Nan the feeling that he was far from this level. There should be some special way of using him. Luo Nan's attention was unavoidably drawn to it. However, that area was destined to not be a good target for observation. The terrifying power in the shadow was not only destructive to the material plane, but also to the mental plane. If it was just a little bit late, it would be like the magma of a volcano eruption, pouring down on Yang Ling's head and face. Luo Nan's pure observation mode was effective. He did not receive a direct attack. But the human-faced arachnid that was fighting to death in the Astral Colosseum was not so lucky. It let out a miserable hiss at the same time, and its body actually burst into flames at the same time. According to the information transmitted by the Wraith sign, the scorching attack of the giant shadow arm and the chaotic core of the human-faced arachnid were simply like the relationship between a torch and boiling oil. There was still a distance before the human-faced arachnid was ignited. As for the other human-faced arachnid, number 3, she had already been burned through. A portion of her remains had been burned into a steaming mist of energy, which was absorbed and consumed by the endlessly expanding shadow. The wraith sign, who was entangled above the altar, had a sense of number 3's state. The instantaneous change refreshed the information of its senses, making it even clearer. Behind this terrifying shadow, there was something more real. Perhaps it was a powerful and hungry demon. This thing had yet to truly enter the logic world, but its powerful strength had already displayed its vicious and ruthless characteristics clearly before everyone's eyes. The curtain on the mental plane was swaying and fluctuating, twisting and twisting. This made it even more difficult for Luo Nan to clearly distinguish the true level and position of the demon. He could only make a scenario guess. This demon was like a gluttonous old cat. It stood on the shore, extending its claws to stir the water, hoping to catch delicious fish and eat its fill. Who was it that attracted this old cat? It was undoubtedly the unfathomable An Wang, who was currently burning within number 3. Oh, judging from the wraith sign's senses, that person's mood seemed to be quite good. It was just as Luo Nan knew. Right now, An Wang's soul was ceaselessly withering within the flames ignited by number 3. However, An Wang was in a cheerful mood. He wantonly released his emotions under the encirclement of the flames. If his fleshly body was still present, it would be the same as laughing aloud. He should be laughing. An Wang was over 60 years old, and he had waited until the era where the heavens and earth were changed. He had been a member of the Order of Justice for 40 years, and he was a firm believer. Unfortunately, he was encumbered by age and his body. No matter how clear his ideals were, the slightest difference was 1,000 miles. He was always blocked from a higher plane, and he no longer had the chance to struggle. But now, as the logic world trembled under the enormous shadow fist of the demon, a crack finally appeared in the incorporeal barrier that had always blocked his head. Looking ahead, perhaps his chances were still slim, but there was still a chance, and it wasn't too far away. The shadow swallowed up a portion of the starry sky. Luo Nan's perception was unable to form an effective analysis of it. For An Wang, this was the best road sign. He no longer needed to distinguish the direction. He drove number 3, which was almost completely burned out, away from the battlefield, and he leaped into the shadow. The wraith sign did not pursue An Wang under the threat of being completely ignited at any moment. Plus, the altar's frame had turned into a pot of porridge from all sorts of disturbances. It was impossible to stop An Wang. As for the demon behind the shadow, it happily accepted the food that directly entered its mouth. But this was not enough. The demon's appetite was clearly extremely good. It didn't discover any fatal threat after its attack in the air, so the congealed shadow began to spread. It entered into casting net mode, and its target was pointed at others. Everyone. Everyone in the logic world had become its target. It was guided by chaotic desires. It would chase after whatever was the most delicious. If everything was delicious, then it would want them all. Before the mist of the probing wave that interfered with the material plane could dissipate, the shadow of darkness flooded in, turning it into surging black clouds that pressed down on the logic world. Chapter 250. Child's body glowed with a mercury-like radiance. It collided with the dark clouds and turbid mist that surged toward him. The two forces collided. Nothing had happened at first, but at this moment, the giant shadow arm smashed Frost River reality with unexhausted momentum. It slammed into the ground. At that moment, the shockwaves swept across, and the 300-story buildings could be seen shaking at a visible degree. The transverse and longitudinal waves were tangent. The change in strength became even more intense. The rooftop of the building beneath Child's feet was like a torn rag. Long scars spread rapidly and branched out in all directions. It looked like it was about to fall apart. Child experienced the difference in strength. He knew he was no match, but he was expressionless. He only cast his gaze at Ouyang Chen. "You've been watching for so long just for this. But it's not enough." Ouyang Chen looked up. The source of the danger hidden behind the scenes had finally revealed itself. Right now, the giant shadow arm had formed a pitch-black pillar that pierced through the heavens and the earth. It was like a rail elevator that led to outer space. Its end was on the ground, but it was still difficult to determine where the front end was. Dark clouds and turbid mist swirled around the pillar, forming a twisted vortex. There were also layers of cloud chi that surged and surged. Lightning flashed within the vortex, revealing a terrifying might. The following changes in the situation could no longer be resolved by watching. Ouyang Chen began to exert his strength. There was nothing special about him. Only the materialized ripples swept out from his body. They were invincible. The dark clouds and turbid mist around the giant shadow pillar split apart. The impact of the ripples made contact with the shadow itself, causing it to tremble endlessly. The demon behind the shadow seemed to feel threatened. Suddenly, a cluster of lightning and fire leaped out of the dark clouds and turbid mist and exploded on top of Ouyang Chen's head. Ouyang Chen did not dodge. He simply opened his mouth and inhaled, swallowing the lightning into his stomach. His expression did not change. Light crackled and pulsed around his body, but it was smoothed out by the ripples. Ouyang Chen dealt with it rather easily after exchanging blows. But then he frowned. It's filled with the scent of greed and restlessness. Child asked, is it an extraordinary? It does not possess extraordinary thought. It is pure chaos and chaos. It's more like a human-faced arachnid. Ouyang Chen's line of sight swept past the giant shadow pillar and the swirling clouds. He sighed. However, it turns out that there is also the existence of a domain in the midst of extreme chaos. From this point of view, it wouldn't be wrong to say that it's an extraordinary. The so-called giant shadow pillar was an area where the spiritual and material planes interfered with each other. The dark clouds and turbid fog at the periphery were the same, but the degree of interference was much lower. As for the periphery, it was of the same level. Given that demon's abilities, it was entirely possible for him to cover the entire logic world with his power. However, its outstanding instincts allowed it to divide itself into different levels. It used the most powerful interference to distort a portion of the physical space, and then used this as a weapon to create an intense conflict with the outside world. It was like a lever, using a small amount of energy to pry out power that far exceeded the limit. The dark clouds and turbid fog, the leaping lightning and fire, all of it came like this. This kind of high-level technique was the effect of an extraordinary's domain. Ouyang Chen did not dwell too much on this point. Chaotic enemies, even if they possessed the abilities of extraordinaries, were not worth paying too much attention to. Chaos, itself had no logic to speak of. Even if they could analyze something, it would only be superficial and could only be used to fool amateurs. Even if he wanted to study it, he had to find the overall mechanism that formed this chaotic power. His target was in Wang, and he had no intention of changing it at the last minute. Ouyang Chen's figure rose slightly, the tips of his feet a few inches off the ground. Without any support, he floated in the air. At the level of extraordinaries, even if they did not have the innate ability to fly, they could still create an environment for flight through the mutual interference between the spiritual and material planes. This was also one of the uses of a domain. Wherever Ouyang Chen went, whether it was the clouds or the lightning, they were all eliminated by the substantial ripples. It looked like he was unimpeded. And at the front of the spreading ripples, it gradually became clear, like a ray of light. The giant shadow pillar, which had originally been a single entity, was now faintly transparent. The front of the ripples, which had always been very orderly, also began to distort. The demon and Ouyang Chen's domain had collided. The air in the logic world suddenly tightened, and the entire area shook. The rooftop of Building A, which had been on the verge of collapse from the confrontation between Child and the dark clouds and turbid fog, had now collapsed. The priests and knights, who were at a loss, all fell down miserably. Child did not have the ability to float in the air, so his figure could not avoid falling down. He fell down from the gray, turbid fog and smoke. He exhaled and a mercury-like radiance forcefully cleared the surrounding area. He raised his head to look up. However, he was not looking at Ouyang Chen, nor was he looking at the demon that had yet to reveal itself. What he saw was clearly a human-faced arachnid struggling endlessly in the shadows. The collision of the domain caused the Darksider life form, which had been submerged within the giant shadow pillar, to reveal itself. Number 3. This human-faced arachnid had just escaped into the depths of the mental plane. When it probed the deep sea, it was still strange and inexplicable. It was hard to track it down. But now that it had reappeared, its demonic body was incomplete, and its demeanor was dispirited and listless. Its entire body was ignited with flames. Most importantly, it had lost its special ability to wander in the depths of the mental plane. Was it because of the impact of the giant shadow pillar, or was it because of some other reason? Child could see that although number 3 was struggling in the shadows, it did not look like it was trying to escape. Instead, it was continuing to break into the inner layer. He could not help but suspect that the one inside was still unwilling. Doing something like this in the depths of the shadow dark domain ruled by the demons was simply suicide. Ouyang Chen, who was in the air, could see things a bit more clearly than Child. The Anweng he knew was not a simple and crude character. Even if Anweng acted on impulse, there would certainly be a basic reason. The conflict between the domains grew even more intense. Ouyang Chen used this opportunity to see through the layers of shadows. He could faintly see a glimmer of light shining within the giant shadow pillar. He had found the reason. Ouyang Chen quickly determined that the so-called glimmer was the projection of the scales of truth. It had not collapsed from the initial impact. Instead, it had embedded itself into the depths of the shadows. Moreover, its form was the same as before. Of course, there were still some changes. The Krite that controlled the chaos element on the black plate was currently curled up into a ball. It was on the verge of death. The mist formed by the chaos element had completely melted into the surrounding shadows. It looked like the Krite would be its turn at any moment. Under Ouyang Chen's attentive gaze, the human-faced arachnid number 3 was doing its utmost to shorten the distance between it and the projection of the scales of truth and the Krite. The arachnid did not cower in the slightest, even though there was a terrifying high temperature and corrosiveness within the shadows that were constantly digesting it. Chapter 251. The Krite entered its abdomen and number 3 suddenly stiffened. The raging flames burning around its body seemed to grow fiercer. Amidst the flames, the remnants of the demonic body were burned to nothingness in an instant. The remaining parts carried the momentum of the impact and collided with the black plate. The flames exploded before it could even get close. The entire human-faced arachnid was turned into flying ash. The bits and pieces of ash fell onto the plate. Flying ash and smoke. Ouyang Chen and Child did not think so. It was just as they expected. As the flying ash fell onto the plate, the turbid mist of chaos element, which had been exhausted and dissipated, began to bubble up. It churned and rolled, quickly forming a scale. Suddenly, a long leg pierced out from within this turbid mist. With a few fiddles, the human-faced arachnid's ugly body propped itself up from within. Its eyes were bewildered with 6 colors and its 8 legs were divided. The flames on its body dissipated and it returned to its peak state. The only difference was that its body was much smaller. It was originally on the same level as the projection of the scales of truth. Now it had shrunk by several times. It was about the same size as the Krite it had just swallowed. Replacing the Krite, reducing the link, and reintegrating the chaos element. Unexpected, but reasonable. This is indeed Anweng's style. Ouyang Chen sighed. The chaos element, which had been utterly defeated, was clearly more efficient under the control of the human-faced arachnid. It was even able to absorb nutrients from the dark shadow domain, allowing it to continue to develop and grow stronger. This process of swallowing and replacing seemed logical, but it had to be known that the image of the Krite had a rich inner meaning. It represented an extremely mature system of the order of justice and was the best choice for controlling the element of chaos. The human-faced arachnid's level of power might be above Anweng's, but connecting it with the existing system of the order of justice was always a problem. Only an old powerhouse like An Weng could debug a feasible plan to replace the Krite in the shortest amount of time possible and successfully implement it. The most exquisite link was not the rebirth of the human-faced arachnid, but the union with the projection of the scales of truth. The miniature figure was no longer number 3's original body. It was its reflection in the scales of truth system. The real number 3 had already merged with the projection of the scales of truth. It was difficult to distinguish the real number 3 from the real scales of truth. But that was a problem on a different level. Ouyang Chen did not stop his advance. As he continued to approach the giant shadow pillar, he analyzed and illuminated the relevant areas, allowing the others to see the situation inside. There were not many people who still had the leisure to pay attention to this side, and Zheng Xiao was probably one of them. This first priest had always been calm. However, in the face of the continuous and drastic changes in the situation, his brain was often shut down. It was only when 03 devoured the Krite that he truly woke up. Zheng Xiao clutched his chest. The Krite had just been swallowed, and the related qi activity had been transferred and reconnected. It had almost paralyzed his heart, and now it was beating wildly in compensation. He was already considered lucky. The priests and knights around him had all fallen to the ground. No matter how the building beneath them shook, they could not feel anything. He did not know how many of them would wake up. He raised his head in a daze and looked into the depths of the shadow. Under the dual illumination of Ouyang Chen and the projection of the scales of truth, the shadow there was peeling off layer by layer. A portion of it was directly evaporated, while another portion was dissolved into the turbid fog of chaotic elements. It was certain that the projection of the scales of truth was using the dark shadow domain to rapidly increase the amount of chaotic elements on the secular side. This action was fruitful. One could see it from the current situation of the scales. The projection of the scales of truth shifted once more into an unbalanced state. But this time, the black plate was the one that continued to sink. This indicated that the weight of the two sides had begun to invert. Zheng Xiao vaguely remembered that the appearance of this phenomenon was actually a preset condition when An Weng spread out the evolution field. An Weng had once told him that there might be a demon mentioned in the Holy Scripture that would take their place and contend against the nearly undefeatable Fairchild. Now, the demon had truly come. Moreover, the demon's strength might far surpass that of the ears of truth. Beneath the thick layer of clouds is an island covered in boiling magma. The demon carries chains on its back as it travels through the clouds. Was this An Weng's verification? Right now, he could not see the island or the chains, but there were layers of clouds and demons. Half of the Holy Scripture's account had been verified. In that case, he could say with a bit of caution that the gate of truth really did exist. Was it really in Xia City? Zheng Xiao's face twitched slightly. If tonight was just a verification, then their mission would have been perfectly completed. They could retreat with success. But the current An Weng was probably thinking differently. The body transforms into a sacrificial vessel, stealing the sky and swapping the sun. According to the ritual of the church, An Weng, you're thinking of. Zheng Xiao had just sorted out an idea. The white plate that was constantly rising upward was constructed by the evolution field. After the projection of the scales of truth, an image appeared for the first time. The weaker side no longer had the qualifications to remain anonymous. The first thing that appeared was the structure of a kite shield. A mercury-like glow flowed on its surface. This was the reflection of the shield of truth. It undoubtedly represented Fairchild. Zheng Xiao cast his gaze toward Building A, but he could not see anything due to the dark clouds and turbid mist. He did not know what kind of mood Fairchild was in right now. But then, an unexpected change occurred. The projection of the kite shield had just appeared when another light and shadow appeared. This one was much more concise. It was the composition of a tetrahedron with an inscribed sphere and an outer scribed sphere. Zheng Xiao had seen it not too long ago. The format pyramid. Zheng Xiao's brain nearly crashed once more. That Luo Nan. When did he go up? The scales of truth could not just go up on a whim. The operating steps inside were very complex. They required an extremely tight foundation and connection of energy. Only Wen could carry out such operations. Considering the time conditions, this meant that when number 3 flew through the air and encountered dangerous situations, she had been dealing with Luo Nan. No matter how much weight Luo Nan occupied, the side of the white plate that carried him and Fairchild clearly could not compare to the other side, which was filled with chaotic and disorderly elements. Right now, the weights in Wen's hands were not too few. They were too many. He could easily deploy them. As long as he could bear the pressure of the demon behind the shadows, as long as he could endlessly obtain weights from the shadows, it would be very difficult to break this advantage. For this reason, Wen added the final stroke to his own plan. On top of the black plate, the human-faced arachnid suddenly opened its mouth and inhaled. It swallowed a portion of the turbid mist surrounding it into its stomach. It was unknown how the human-faced arachnid operated, but the constantly tilting scales actually began to return to normal. As it swayed, the black and white plates rose and fell. The human-faced arachnid also swallowed clouds of mist. Clearly, it was switching weights and searching for a point of balance. With enough weights, this was far too easy. The black and white plates appeared on a horizontal line once more, fulfilling the requirements of the Order's holy object. It was like a fully matured seed that was buried in the void. Chapter 252. What happened? Luo Nan's mental senses chased after Wen, observing the logic world with his clairvoyance. He understood some of the changes in the situation, but he only understood half of them. By the time the giant cocoon of light appeared, he vaguely knew that he had reached the most crucial stage. However, he was limited by his level of understanding. His thoughts were stuck here, and it was hard for him to continue. He could only continuously increase the precision of his senses and observe seriously. Even though this consumed 10 to 100 times more mental energy than the life sketches he had just comprehended, he felt that it was necessary. At this time, an indescribable light shone out from the projection of the scales of truth. One could not see anything by just sensing it, but under this light, the black and white plates of the scales of truth instantly lost their color. Black was no longer black, and white was no longer white. It was as if some crucial element had been extracted. It was as if they had been dyed together, indistinguishable. It was this indescribable light that soundlessly opened up a region within the shadow pillar. Its appearance was similar to the cocoon of light that the first ablatums constructed the evolution field. It was just that it was 10 times larger. The projection of the scales of truth resided in the center of the cocoon of light. Light and shadow interweaved, forming countless lines of varying thickness. At first glance, they looked like branches that were spreading out. They grew endlessly, and some even wrapped around the two plates. The young branches spiraled and pierced into the projection above. It didn't matter if it was the human-faced arachnid, the kite shield, or the format pyramid. Because of this, the 3 projection diagrams underwent changes at the same time. Light and shadow warped slightly, and their structures melted. Holy space, extraordinary substitution. Ouyang Chen's body was covered in layers of ripples, offsetting the resistance of the shadow pillar. He approached the cocoon of light step by step. The front of the ripples had already made contact with the cocoon of light, undulating and rippling. Although his progress was not slow, he still frowned when he saw the cocoon of light form and the ripples transform. You've gone from a small substitution of worldly objects to a large substitution of the extraordinary domain. And Wen, your moves are truly extraordinary. However, has your first ablatum allowed you to borrow the power of the scales of truth? There was no response from within the cocoon of light, but Luo Nan's heart inexplicably palpitated. Substitution. He understood a bit. At this moment, the two ends of the scales, the human-faced arachnid, him, and Fairchild, were they exchanging places? No, it wasn't. After all, the two altar frameworks were still entangled. And Wang had placed Luo Nan on the scales of truth, so the two frameworks were destined to form a close connection. Luo Nan could roughly sense that the two ends of the scale had merely blurred the boundary between chaos and order. There was no relationship of substitution between the two. It was more like a sort of blending. Together, they formed a sort of indescribable existence, and they used this as a foundation to grow and strengthen without end. As for the replacement, it happened on an even more mysterious level, and he had no idea what it was at the moment. But the human-faced arachnid, Fairchild, and Luo Nan were all unavoidably affected by the exchange. They were all greatly affected. The rooftop of Building A had already collapsed. Amid the dust and debris, Fairchild raised his hands and stared at it. He watched as the flowing mercury light dimmed layer by layer, his face expressionless. Luo Nan swept his eyes over this scene. He was slightly startled, and his heart suddenly throbbed. Not good. Even Child was in trouble, let alone him. Something was definitely going to happen on the main body's side. The melting of the format pyramid structure on the scales of truth was an ominous sign. Hiss, Luo Nan's mind returned to his main body, and he drew in a breath of cold air. He was cut in half. Ever since Wang pulled him into the framework of the altar of the scales of truth, he had been unable to get rid of the feeling of restraint. Now, this feeling had intensified. His blood and energy were blocked, causing many parts of his body to feel numb. His control over his body had dropped substantially. In contrast, his internal organs, which lacked sensory nerves, seemed to have rebelled. The diffuse sensation of pain caused many of his internal organs to convulse. This caused Luo Nan's body to begin to tremble lightly. In the end, he even began to sway. On the AR interface, at least 7 or 8 diagrams simultaneously displayed the color of blood red, signifying danger. The whispers and conversations within the vehicle were swept clean in an instant. All that was left were the beeping sounds of the instrument's alarm, rising and falling, interweaving together. Internal organ dysfunction. Hold him up. Bai Xinyan's command rang out, but it soon faded away. This was because at this very moment, a lava-like heat poured down from the top of Luo Nan's head. His brain seemed to be boiling, and it was as if someone had given him a heavy punch. His mind was dizzy, and his consciousness was dazed. His mental senses lost their accuracy, and his clairvoyance became blurry and indistinct. His headquarters had actually been raided. Luo Nan did his best to calm his mind, hoping to recover his clarity of mind. But even though his thoughts were a mess, he knew that Wang had certainly used the scales of truth and the enormous cocoon of light that had just been erected. That old fellow had really struck Luo Nan's weak spot in an instant. This wouldn't do. Luo Nan felt the incorporeal net on his body rapidly tighten. It had already bound his body tightly, and it traced all the way up. It wanted to completely seal off all of the transformations of his body and soul. When that happened, he would truly be waiting for death. The unforeseen event happened too suddenly. Luo Nan had no time to consider anything else. Before the incorporeal net was about to close, Luo Nan completely obeyed his instincts. He visualized the formatting pagoda and commanded the wraith sign to exert force. Amidst the trembling of the chains, Luo Nan's soul left his body and ascended. He took a step into the depths of the mental plane. The incorporeal net closed, but it was a step too late. In the instant his soul left his body, Luo Nan could clearly hear the snapping sounds of tree branches snapping. There was also quite a bit of resistance present. Fortunately, his method of leaving his body was to borrow external force. It was close to being rough, directly charging into the depths of the mental plane. Otherwise, he might not have been able to succeed in one go. As for now, Luo Nan's mind suddenly became clear after his body and soul separated. His mental senses stabilized once more. The most miraculous thing was that the feeling of pain in his main body instantly disappeared by quite a bit. Yes, Wang had used the blessing of the shield of truth to make an issue out of it. Luo Nan had forcibly left his body, breaking the mode of interference between the mental and the material. Naturally, he had broken free of the shackles. He was no longer restricted by them. It was just that nothing could ever be perfect. Though he had dodged a calamity, he had lost control of his main body. Before he could lay down, he fell backward and directly fell into Zhang Yingying's embrace. He lost all sensation. The carriage was in a flurry of activity. The situation looked as if Luo Nan was about to breathe his last in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan could not care about what would happen to his main body next. Though he had broken An Weng's plan, it was still impossible for him to completely break free from this vortex. As long as the conflict between the altar frame and the scales of truth and the formatting pagoda were still entangled, it was impossible for him to truly remain uninvolved. Right now, the results of Luo Nan's escape were directly reflected on the projection of the scales of truth within the so-called holy space. The formatting pagoda still existed, but it had faded quite a bit. More importantly, the state of warping and melting had reversed, returning it to a complete state. This change was neither too big nor too small, but it directly disturbed the balanced state of fusion between chaos and order. The growth of the branches within the cocoon of light came to a halt. Some of them even withered in an instant. Chapter 253. Aya. Zheng Xiao could not help but sigh. Those who were still paying attention to the cocoon of light, the changes in the holy space, were all people with discerning eyes. The minute changes inside could not be hidden from anyone. He knew that An Weng had not tricked him lightly, but they were of the same order, so he unconsciously leaned to the side. He was a clear-sworn first ablatum. He was familiar with the classics and knew how valuable the holy space represented by the cocoon of light was. When they had set up the evolution field, the external magic arrays were similar in shape. However, upon closer inspection, they were merely mechanical imitations. The current holy space was a domain formed by the holy object after achieving an exquisite balance. When the holy space was set up, the objects that achieved balance, whether it was chaos or order, would become sacrifices for the exchange. They would become the stepping stones to the extraordinary domain. This was the true path to the heavens of the one-step extraordinary. The Order of Justice viewed the holy space as the mother of the Holy Spirit. As long as the sacrifices on the scales of truth could make up for the consumption, even an extraordinary could be born from nothing. At the very least, every generation of first ablatums had achieved this through the great exchange of the holy space. They represented the blessing and supreme authority of the holy object. It was by relying on this inconceivable power that the Order of Justice was able to maintain a steady increase in the number of high-level experts for the past 40 years. They were able to spread their teachings to the entire world and become one of the three great secret orders. Zheng Xiao pondered. An Weng's fleshly body was completely destroyed. There was a 70 to 80% chance that he would use this technique to reconstruct his fleshly body, the so-called Holy Spirit body. This was also the most common use of the Great Exchange. 09 small say net, if he succeeded, the Order of Justice would gain another extraordinary. Although the price he paid tonight was disastrous, it was still worth it. However, there was a flaw now. There was a problem at the root. Even if the body was successfully reconstructed, the so-called extraordinary could no longer be mentioned. It was a huge loss. The withering of the branches continued. Even though a considerable portion was growing to make up for the gap, the phenomenon of withering and flourishing could not be eliminated in a short period of time. What was even more fatal was that with this delay, Ouyang Qin had already broken through the final obstruction of the shadow pillar. He stood outside the cocoon of light, within reach. Although the holy space had endless wondrous uses, it was never a sturdy barrier. No matter what, it could not withstand the attack of an extraordinary. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. An Weng, are you there? A strange greeting suddenly sounded. Zheng Xiao opened his eyes in astonishment. He saw Ouyang Qin standing outside the cocoon of light. He stretched out his hand and lightly knocked on the cocoon's outer shell, as if he was a guest who had come to pay a visit. He was polite and courteous. Although the sound was a bit loud, it could still be clearly heard hundreds of meters away. The cocoon of light was silent. There was no response. Seeing this, Yang Chen muttered to himself for a while. Then, he increased the strength of his fingers and pressed against the outer layer of the light cocoon. With the increase in strength, the outer shell of the light cocoon clearly sank, and the texture became obvious. It looked like a raw egg that had been peeled off and left with its membrane. It was translucent and could be pierced by a finger at any time. In the end, the holy space was not a raw egg. Under the influence of external stimuli, its feedback exceeded everyone's expectations. The cocoon of light was cramping like a living thing, like an enormous heart. The branches and veins inside broke out of the wall and spread out. The shadows, which had already faded away, gathered from the periphery. They came into contact with the veins, and it was as if they had been injected with fresh blood. They came alive in an instant, layer upon layer, pouncing over to cover the cocoon of light, causing it to retreat into the depths of the shadows. At the same time, the logic world rumbled and shook. The enormous shadow pillar that had been smashed into the ground was uprooted and contracted upwards. Dark clouds and turbid mists surged like waves, assaulting one's face and causing one's heart to feel stifled. Like this? Zheng Xiao was a bit stunned, and a thought fiercely came to mind. Wrong. This isn't the forging of the Holy Spirit body at all. He's repeating his previous actions. He wants to control. Just like controlling the human-faced arachnid, and one clearly wanted to use the power of the enormous shadow pillar and even the demon behind the scenes as a vessel for his soul to reside in. He wanted to achieve complete control. However, the consequences of Luo Nan's escape were showing themselves. The sound of thunder exploded. It was the roar of the demon behind the shadow pillar. Luo Nan did not reverse An Weng's direction, but the instantaneous change he created reduced the upper limits of An Weng's control. The enormous shadow pillar was uprooted halfway and cracked apart with a hum. Dark shadow clouds pervaded everywhere, flooding the entire logic world. No one could dodge them. What was the difference between this and receiving an attack from a demon? Zheng Xiao's face turned green. He summoned his last bit of strength to instantly cast an incantation, erecting a transparent barrier around his body. He blocked the first wave of the shadow cloud's corrosion. However, not everyone was as lucky as him. The priests and knights of the order were enveloped by the black mist. It was as if they had been corroded by poisonous flames. Dark flames instantly ignited, and they were burned to ashes in a few breaths of time. These people had died unjustly, but they had fainted from the impact. After all, they did not suffer any pain. The ones who suffered the most were the Ablatum Knights. The corrosive attack of the shadow cloud was one thing, but what they faced was no longer an external threat. Instead, it was the shackles that had taken root in the depths of their bodies and souls over the years. They were the vessels for the magical power of the first Ablatums. This was also the source of their power. Right now, An Weng's power was being channeled through this channel, giving them a boost. A boost that was completely out of control. The power of the demon's rampage far surpassed the limits of what they could endure. Muffled explosions rang out in the corner of the building. Foul blood blossomed. Several Ablatum Knights exploded one after another. At this point, the elite forces of the Order of Justice in Xia City were practically wiped out. 6 muffled explosions rang out in a row. Baze, who was just about to climb up to the rooftop, suddenly froze. His powerful body suddenly swelled up. His bones and muscles creaked and groaned. Just like that, he staggered up to the ruins of the rooftop that had already collapsed. It looked as if he would explode at any moment, but in the end, his powerful talent and the toughness of his fleshly body far surpassed that of the other Ablatum Knights. Baze opened his mouth with great effort. His originally snow-white teeth were already soaked in blood. He roared with a hoarse voice. Fairchild. Fairchild, who was standing on the other side of the building, turned around when he heard the roar. Baze's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. He was already in a half-blind state, but he was still able to miraculously lock onto Fairchild's position. He roared once more and charged up. Baze only needed 2 steps to traverse a distance of several dozen meters. He smashed out with his fist. The already dim mercury-like radiance sputtered. The shield of truth was broken in one strike, and Fairchild's majestic body was blasted into the air. Baze chased after Fairchild at an even faster speed, bombarding him with a series of heavy punches. Die! 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 Baze's roar was devoid of any killing intent. It was just a venting of extreme pain. In the end, he simply tore apart all pretenses. Kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Come and kill me! The twisting tendons were like living snakes. They wandered around Baze's body, giving him absolute power. But at the same time, pain and despair were branded within. Chapter 254. Child did not say a word. He was purely defending. At this time, his shield of truth had been broken, and he no longer had the almost absolute defense ability. Baze, who had been forced to break through his limits, had fists that were sharper and more terrifying than any axe, hammer, or knife. They constantly tore apart Child's robe and flesh, bringing with them a thin layer of blood mist. Even so, Child was not knocked down by Baze. Even if the power of chaos continued to attack and erode him, there was still a fundamental order that always existed. No physical structure could compare to it. Baze punched again, forcibly blasting away Child's raised arm. The force of the punch penetrated Child's chest and into his lungs, crushing Child's chest until it visibly caved in. Child did not dodge. He used a hand bind and locked Baze's joints. The two of them instantly entered a more dangerous close combat. First, 2 heads collided with each other. In an instant, both sides were covered in blood. This collision also forced Baze's ferocious teeth back. Child was still holding onto Baze's elbow joint. Borrowing the force of the other party's charge and retreat, he pulled outwards, forcibly twisting Baze up and smashing him heavily into the rubble. But then, he was also knocked over by the brute force of Baze. The strength of the 2 humanoid beasts was terrifying. Under the force of the collision, the floor under the rubble could no longer withstand it. Even the steel frame collapsed with a loud bang. The 2 of them fell together, and their heads and faces were covered by the rubble above. But even so, in the narrowest space, they did not stop. Instead, they continuously hit each other's face, chest, and waist. The colliding shock waves swept away the rubble, avoiding the result of being buried. But before they landed on the ground, both of them were already vomiting blood. No matter how injured he was, Child remained as cold as iron. The opportunity he had been waiting for finally arrived after Baze's 2 unreserved waves of attacks. At the cost of another heavy elbow strike on his chest, he took advantage of the gap left by Baze's overexertion and performed a joint technique, forcefully twisting Baze's left elbow joint. Then, he took a heavy hit on his head and broke Baze's right shoulder. At this point, both of Baze's arms were broken. But even so, Baze was like a mad tiger. Ignoring his shattered shoulder and dislocated joints, he stood up and continued to fight. However, his rapidly declining athletic ability was no longer enough to support this kind of fighting style. Fairchild pulled away and delivered a series of combination punches, hitting Baze's chin, ears, and other vital points, concussing his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. Finally, Fairchild kicked Baze's lower abdomen, temporarily dispersing the inner chi he had lost control of. Boom! Baze was sent flying and smashed into a distorted pillar. A large amount of earth and rocks fell down and covered his body. In the end, he struggled to get up, but he still roared and screamed. Pure chaos and ruthlessness tormented the strongest man in Xia City to the point where he was neither human nor ghost. Fairchild panted slightly. As soon as he adjusted his breathing, he said, "Help." His voice was low, and it did not travel far. When he spoke, the area within a 20-meter radius around him was filled with dark clouds. Aside from the struggling bays, there was no one alive. However, a mere 2 seconds after his voice fell, Fairchild's chest glowed with a faint light. The tetrahedron format pyramid was half embedded in the juncture between his chest and abdomen. It helped him adjust his energy and blood, alleviating his injuries. Fairchild extended his hand and adjusted his broken ribs. Some of them had already pierced into his internal organs, causing him to bleed. But as a powerful being who was only a step away from becoming an extraordinary, such injuries were far from fatal. After the broken ribs were pulled out and reset, the self-repair function of his internal organs began to display its effect. He retained at least 50 to 60% of his combat strength. Of course, the standard of comparison was in a state without the support of the shield of truth. There's still him. Fairchild extended his hand and pointed at Baze. Are you sure? Luo Nan's consciousness cut in from the mental plane. Fairchild had contacted Luo Nan through the order imprint that Luo Nan had projected earlier. This also showed that Luo Nan's existence in the logic world was no secret to a powerful being like Fairchild. He can still be saved, Fairchild replied calmly. I feel that you can do it. All right. With just a few words, all the pressure had been thrown onto Luo Nan's body. Of course, Fairchild knew that he was not answering Luo Nan's question. He explained, aside from An Wang, the Order of Order has some prospects in Xia City. He and Zheng Shao. You need to preserve some of your vitality. Well, Luo Nan had nearly forgotten that Fairchild was a member of the Order of Justice. Even though he was an executioner of the truth side who was as incompatible as fire and water with the secular side, he was also a fanatical believer of the Order of Justice. It was hard to fathom Fairchild's current feelings in a situation where the Order of Justice had suffered such disastrous casualties. But thinking about it, Fairchild was far from being happy. As for An Wang, Luo Nan did not finish his sentence, but his meaning was very clear. Was this the time to consider preserving some of his vitality? The giant shadow pillar was rising endlessly. An Wang's plans and methods were already as clear as day. The demon behind the scenes was far too powerful. If An Wang could truly create a miracle and use the scales of truth and the holy space to control the demon in one fell swoop, then the people of the logic world would probably be purged once more. You're thinking too much, Fairchild responded simply. It's not your turn to interfere in a battle between extraordinaries. This was the standard truth, leaving Luo Nan speechless. He sighed soundlessly and no longer spoke nonsense. He gave Baze the support of the format pyramid. Compared to Fairchild's immediate effect, Baze's situation was not going smoothly. Right now, the inside of the black man's body was a mess. External and internal injuries were secondary. What was truly troublesome was the chaos element that had been forcefully poured into his body. This was a crude replacement. It was as if the chaos essence of the human-faced arachnid had been forcefully stuffed in, replacing all the functions of a human body. The fact that Baze's body did not explode on the spot only proved that Baze's body was tough to an inconceivable degree. It was useless to know the cause of the disease. Baze's chaotic essence had already fused deeply with Baze's after the previous frenzied assault. It was like a cup of water that had been soaked in ink. No matter how clear it was impossible for it to return to its original state. What's more, the amount of ink was greater than the cup of water itself. This was probably what it meant when the disease was beyond cure. Luo Nan switched to clairvoyance mode. He was no longer able to draw out Baze's constellation diagram if he used the life sketch method to observe. He could only draw something closer to the human-faced arachnid's dark clouds and shadows. In a certain sense, the current Baze could no longer be called a human. The chaotic essence of a demon had already deeply replaced Baze's original functions. This person should have died long ago, but he was still alive. Baze's powerful fleshly body and his crumbling internal foundation were mixed together to form this extremely special case. Chapter 255. Luo Nan's mental senses swept Bei's inside out. The more he looked, the greater the pressure. The more he looked, the more he did not know what to do. For a time, his mind was filled with resentment toward An Wang. That An Wang. He didn't want to be a person, but he also conveniently tricked his own subordinate. Fine, An Wang did not care about this at all. He was wholeheartedly working on the demon behind the shadows. You can save him. Fairchild repeated similar words. His confidence far exceeded Luo Nan's. How can I save him? Luo Nan did not need to pretend to communicate with Fairchild. He responded in a bad mood. His heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys are all unreliable. All of his functions are in chaos. They are all for the sake of accumulating the most explosive power. The verbal information suddenly stopped here. The efficiency of the exchange of information on the mental plane far exceeded that of a regular conversation. Fairchild understood Luo Nan's confusion and difficulties. Luo Nan also roughly understood Fairchild's train of thought. He even used more concise and accurate words to express himself. Build an order frame for him and restrain him. Just like that. Fairchild's train of thought was only a general idea. It originated from the feeling of order he received on the mental plane back at Frost River reality. Now that Luo Nan had added the finishing touch, Fairchild immediately praised, order frame. This description is very good. Of course it was good. Right now, An Wang was doing this. Yes, there was also Luo Nan himself. Through the conflict with An Wang on the altar frame, Luo Nan gained a new understanding of many things that were previously fuzzy and unclear. Altar and sacrificial offering represented a kind of order. The essence of demons was indeed chaos, but it was chaos that was controlled by a certain order. There needed to be a large frame above the chaos. Otherwise, it would be chaos that was completely meaningless. The human-faced arachnid was the best example. The Wraith Sign's many successful sacrificial offerings proved that this kind of chaotic existence could be accommodated within a high level of order. This was the only way to explain how a Darksider life form, which acted completely by instinct, could use efficient methods to make correct choices most of the time. The current Baze was a humanoid demon. Although it was a bit nondescript, there was no difference in essence. It would naturally be extremely difficult to make him return to his human state. However, it seemed feasible to just maintain it. Or even take it a step further. Luo Nan pondered for a moment before saying, if you don't mind this state, you might be able to preserve your life. But this will completely change the foundation. Is there any meaning to it? Fairchild shook his head slightly. He looked down at Baze, who was panting violently. The man's features were twisted from the pain, and his black face was stained with dirt and blood. Even his mouth was no exception. He looked as ferocious as a ghost. Sensing Fairchild's gaze, Baze's half-protruding eyes met Fairchild's. However, his pupils were dilated and no longer focused, making him look even more terrifying. The skin that bore this terrifying and hideous face was rapidly turning gray. The strength of its struggle was getting weaker and weaker, and it was also getting stiffer and stiffer. It looked like the last bit of its life could be extinguished at any time. For living beings, the essence of chaos was infinitely equal to death. On the other hand, if there was life, then its essence might not be pure chaos. There was always a glimmer of hope. Make your move, Fairchild replied. Luo Nan didn't say anything more. The radiance of the format pyramid grew brighter and brighter at Baze's chest. This represented that Luo Nan's order was affecting Baze. However, a simple blessing from the format pyramid was not enough. He still needed a more direct and efficient method. Luo Nan needed some reference, but his consciousness had just walked around the altar frame. Information that came from the depths of the mental plane caused his consciousness to deviate a bit. He was a bit distracted. And Wang's control over the demon behind the scenes seemed to have reached a new level. Ouyang Chen had already been completely driven out of the giant shadow pillar. Ouyang Chen was speeding up his departure from the logic world. Focus. Fairchild warned him. His meaning was clear: don't touch what you shouldn't touch. Don't force yourself. Luo Nan understood Fairchild's meaning. However, the altar frame was entangled on a level like this. It was not something he could do even if he wanted to stay out of it. In reality, as Luo Nan exerted his influence on Baize, his entanglement with An Weng floated to the surface once more. An Weng did not pay attention to Baize, but Luo Nan had constructed an order frame to deal with the essence of chaos. It was a part of the demon that An Weng had just stripped off. As a result, Luo Nan's level of tracing back inevitably came into contact with An Weng's scales of truth frame. The hidden connection was instantly highlighted. An Weng and Luo Nan met once more. This was not a happy meeting. Instead, it was a collision, conflict, and pursuit between two order frames on a higher level. Oh, there was also President Ouyang Chen. His mental senses had come to join in on the fun. This was the first time Luo Nan clearly sensed the existence of this president, but it soon blurred away. The reason was that he was quite far away. It was like a diving competition. Luo Nan and An Weng both had clear directions to reach their destination. Ouyang Chen's diving depth was certainly not inferior to theirs, but he was unfamiliar with the underwater environment. He spent too much energy searching for his target, and he was left far behind by the cheating duo. In the end, Ouyang Chen simply got lost. There was no need to talk about anything else. It was precisely because Ouyang Chen was left behind that An Weng shifted most of the energy he had placed on Ouyang Chen to Luo Nan. He scanned Luo Nan over and over again, paying extreme attention. An Weng could not be blamed for doing this. Right now, the holy space was deep within the giant shadow pillar. It was attempting to control the demon, but it was not completely successful. Luo Nan traced it back through the chaos element on Baize's body. They occupied different sizes, inside and outside, but their levels were the same. Then the problem came: 2 frames, 2 elements, 2 directions. There was only one demon behind the scenes. Who did it listen to? It didn't want to listen to anyone. A restless roar penetrated through countless curtains into the logic world. The berserk power urged the dark clouds of shadow. The vortex seemed to have substance, corroding and tearing apart everything it covered. Dust filled the sky, and the 3 buildings swayed even more violently. Such a reaction allowed Luo Nan to confirm one step further. Perhaps the demon behind the scenes was thousands of times more powerful than the human-faced arachnid, but they were essentially the same goods. This fellow's reaction was practically the same as the burning wraith on the warship a dozen or so days ago, the previous incarnation of the wraith sign. They were both helpless when faced with this situation. The powerful instincts nurtured within their chaos could only be accomplished under a higher plane of order frame. Once this order frame encountered an attack, it would be more delightful to be captured without putting up a fight. Right now, An Weng was pursuing the specific hierarchical structure of this order frame. He was simulating and overlapping in order to realize control over the demon. An Weng had a clear direction. This was probably a hint given to him by the holy space. But Luo Nan had one as well. Chapter 256. A soft trembling sound rang through the void. With the human-faced arachnid as a living example, it was hard for Luo Nan not to associate it with the heavily chained crow. Over 10 days ago, Luo Nan had truly constructed the format and entered the level of, "My heart's a prison." The speed of Luo Nan's progress was inconceivable even to Luo Nan. But he knew very well that up until now, the embodiment of his greatest ability was still the format pyramid and the heavily chained crow. This was the precious treasure left to him by his grandfather. Everything was born from this. Luo Nan was still unable to completely understand the mysteries within even to this day. He could only say that he had comprehended some basic principles. That was a frame. From the changes in the altar frame, it could be seen that the so-called dark chains were very much like the materialization of some high-level order frame. Luo Nan was unable to understand how his grandfather was able to assimilate this order frame into medicine, breathing, and visualization. It was branded onto the body of a cultivator, allowing them to grasp this high-level technique. But the most important thing right now was still the application. Luo Nan pondered to himself that the directivity of his heavily chained crow was not much inferior to An Wang's. It seemed that the crow was able to follow Luo Nan down a distance. But what was the point of doing that? By Xinyan and the others' mockery, Fairchild's warning at the same time, and all the previous lessons. Had he not suffered enough? Without thinking any further, the dark chains materialized and pierced through the void, piercing through Bei's head. This wasn't the first time Luo Nan had used the heavily chained crow on a living person, but this was certainly the first time he had a clear goal of order. Luo Nan did not understand or pay attention to the specific circulation of blood energy. His attention was completely focused on the effect of the order frame on the nature of chaos. To say that it was useful was an overestimation for him. Luo Nan had never been an expert in interfering with the material plane. Now, the direction of his development had begun to shift towards pure observation. To a large extent, he had given up on interacting with the material plane in exchange for outstanding performance in mental sensing. It was impossible for Luo Nan to turn Bei into a marionette. It was also impossible for Luo Nan to forcefully turn Bei onto a new orbit of order. All he did was guide Bei to see through the chaos mist and the higher level, new order, that was eroded by the chaos elements. With this, he could sort out the structure of Bei's body and soul and alleviate the damage caused by the chaos element's erosion. The problem was that Bei had already lost his basic control. Even if there was a clear answer in front of him, it would be difficult for him to follow up. Luo Nan had long since anticipated this. This was the final fork in the road. Luo Nan gave Fairchild one last reminder. This is my order frame. Mine. But Luo Nan did not say anything. However, he did not say a word. He half knelt down and punched Bei in the chest. Bei spat out a mouthful of blood, which splattered all over Child's face. The latter was unfazed and threw another punch. However, at this time, Bei, who was paralyzed on the ground, straightened his upper body and used his chest to block Fairchild's fist halfway. At this moment, their eyes met. Fairchild raised his chin slightly. If you want to live, follow me. Bei gasped for air. The pain caused by the corrosion and symbiosis of the chaotic elements was still ongoing. Inside and outside of his body, every blood vessel was twisting, and every muscle was twitching. In the midst of chaos, the human body's habitual functions and order had long since changed beyond recognition, and there was no possibility of recovery. Chaos. World, Nan. Nan. To say to the human body. And the human body function. And this was something that he was unable to accomplish in a short amount of time. And Luo Nan was currently demonstrating a certain possibility for him. Bei could only comply. He had no other choice. Bei closed his eyes. His breathing became hurried and chaotic. Then, it suddenly stopped. A few seconds later, it resumed, and the cycle repeated. At the same time, the muscles, bones, blood vessels, and internal organs of his body squirmed crazily. They matched the rhythm of his breathing. After repeating it 5 times, which meant that he had failed 5 times, Bei suddenly let out a wild roar. The back of his head slammed against the floor of the ruins. His body twitched violently, and his blood vessels bulged all over his skin, forming an ugly and ferocious image. Time passed second by second. The dark clouds and turbid mist stirred by the giant shadow pillar corroded layer after layer of the building. Parts of the building collapsed from time to time. The skyscraper was on the verge of collapse. A portion of the dark clouds and turbid mist came over. Of course, they could not harm Fair. They could do nothing to Luo Nan, but they were inexplicably attracted to the roaring Beis. They went in and out of his mouth and nose. It was as if they were making some sort of exchange. Fair was unmoved. He watched all of this in silence. Hiss. A long breath rang out. Baze suddenly exerted his strength. In a short 2 seconds, he actually sucked in all the mist around his body. His painfully struggling body swelled slightly. Then it suddenly froze, and he collapsed back onto the floor. He gasped for breath. His chest rose and fell clearly, but his breathing had already entered the range of that of a normal person. This meant that Baze had found a new order of life amidst the chaos and disorder. However, this might not be a satisfactory ending for Baze. Baze opened his eyes. His ice-cold eyes pointed at the night sky, unfocused. His malevolent aura was like a flame beneath a layer of ice. It was weak but tenacious. Luo Nan knew that this brother's gaze was directed at him. But what could he do? An interesting change appeared in the structure of the pyramid. Baze's figure silently appeared on the staff level. This was the result of Baze reconstructing the structure of his body and soul in accordance to the established order with the help of the heavily chained crow. Luo Nan had already explained this to Fair in advance. Fair tacitly agreed, but Baze might not be completely convinced. Fine, Baze would definitely reject Baze. Luo Nan did not have many examples of what sort of restrictions one would have to endure as a member of the format pyramid. The comparison was not strong. Wraith Sign, who was on the skill level, was very obedient. Cat Eyes, who was on the student level, was very unruly. As for Baze, who was on the staff level, the heavily chained crow suddenly trembled violently. Baze's body fiercely twitched amidst the rattling vibrations. Deep within the structure of his body and soul, a hook that had long since been warped and deformed shattered. In an instant, an obscure fluctuation penetrated through the air. Luo Nan was startled and shocked. He cried out in his mind, but before he could react, An Weng's telepathic thoughts were like a longsword drawn from a furnace. They sliced through the air, bringing with them an intense burning pain. That hook was certainly the method An Weng used to control Ablatum knights like Baze. Even though Baze had been abandoned by An Weng, it was hard to avoid alarming An Weng when this sort of change occurred. However, the reason for An Weng's intense reaction was not as simple as losing Baze. Luo Nan had realized his control over Baze. He had erected a restraining order on top of Baze's chaotic essence. In a certain sense, this was tantamount to controlling a portion of the power of the demon behind the scenes, even if it was a portion that had been abandoned. This was just like An Weng trying to control a continent. He had turned the sky and earth upside down, but he had yet to obtain any results. But Luo Nan, who was next to An Weng, had first taken control of a small island that had separated from the main body of the continent due to a volcanic earthquake. This was probably what it felt like. Metaphors could describe reality, but in the end, they could not replace reality. Luo Nan and An Weng did not have the relationship of an island and a continent. There was no vast ocean between them. There was only an indescribable distance of sensing. It was too dangerous. If Luo Nan was An Weng, he would probably think the same. Plus, there was another element that seeped in. Chapter 257. Luo Nan was used to hearing the sound of the heavily chained crow trembling. Of course, that was to himself. How could there be any sound on the mental plane? All there was the corresponding energy and information. In the past, the heavily chained crow spent most of its time hidden in the deepest depths of the mental plane. It was only known to outsiders for a limited period of time. But right now, An Weng's depth on the mental plane was not inferior to Luo Nan's. He could clearly sense the relevant energy and information. Yes, An Weng had certainly heard it. There was Baze in front, and there was vibrations behind. It was unknown how An Weng understood this series of changes. But it was certain that An Weng was paying close attention to this. He even temporarily stopped controlling the demon. The heart of the cocoon of light in the holy space was shockingly quiet at this moment. All movements had stopped. Correspondingly, An Weng's telepathic thoughts chopped toward Luo Nan once more. Even Child next to him could feel the scorching sensation of the red-hot longsword, let alone Luo Nan himself. Withdraw your senses. Don't provoke him. Child's judgment made Luo Nan speechless. But soon, Child realized his mistake. He furrowed his brows and cast his gaze in the direction of the giant shadow pillar. And Weng's movements were unfathomable. As for the demon, it was admittedly quite manic, but the chaotic energy and information it brought could be viewed as background noise. It could be easily filtered out. Because of this, the energy and information in this warped deep space instantly became much more refreshing. For a time, all that was left was the faint sound of the heavily chained crow. It grew clearer and clearer, louder and louder. Luo Nan felt a bit of pressure in his heart. He discovered that the source of the energy and information that resonated with the chains did not seem to be him alone. The shaking of the heavily chained crow gave rise to echoes in this warped deep space. The transmission of energy and information was certainly not in the form of sound waves. It was far too indiscernible. If one really wanted to find the source, one could only analyze it layer by layer to search for clues and determine the direction. Presumably, An Weng had discovered this point, which was why he stopped his actions to reduce the interference. But no matter how much interference there was, it was too difficult for Luo Nan. His analytical ability was far from this level, so he was at a loss for a time. Hold on. Idiot. Luo Nan cursed to himself. His brain had become stiff from the series of unforeseen events. Actually, he didn't need to go through all this trouble. The crucial information could be completely seen from the heavily chained crow. His attention returned to the heavily chained crow. In just a few short seconds, a string in his heart was forcefully plucked. The judgment of the so-called echo, just now was torn apart. The sound in the deep space was not an echo, but a resonance. Using this concept of physics, the current state of the heavily chained crow could be described as being at the same frequency as something else. One side affected the other side, and the other side affected the other side. The originally minuscule amplitude suddenly expanded. Of course, it made it impossible for the heavily chained crow to hide, but it also made an even more obscure existence in the depths of space appear. Hua la la. Roar. The second half was the roar of a demon. Ever since the sound of the chains reverberated on this plane, this powerful demon had become extremely irritable. The power that was about to withdraw from the logic world swept out as a form of venting. The high floors of the building collapsed one after another wherever it passed. Rubble flew everywhere. Spectators like Fairchild, Baze, and Zheng Xiao had to dodge in a hurry to avoid being caught in the crossfire. Of course, the demon's attack involved the mental plane. The corresponding sweep was extremely powerful. If it was possible, it would certainly crush the few little fleas inside and outside of its own domain to death. Then it would chew and swallow them. However, it was not easy to accomplish this. The current Luo Nan was no longer the fledgling who would tremble with fear when facing the human-faced arachnid siege hammer. Right now, his sensing method of pure observation manifested a marvelous advantage. This completely effortless method allowed Luo Nan's mental senses to melt into the air. It was formless and incorporeal, but it was everywhere. Under the storm-like mental attack, Luo Nan's mental senses might distort for a moment, but the recoil force he received was extremely small. It didn't even hurt or itch. Under these circumstances, it did not matter whether the buildings of the logic world survived or not. To put it bluntly, it was nothing more than a silhouette that intervened between the void and reality. The limit of the logic world's endurance was the major problem. As the demon's power continued to bombard the world, a clear tremor appeared in the night sky. Corresponding ripples appeared frequently, warping and turbulent. The world was on the verge of collapse. Fairchild and Baze were both nimble people when the skyscraper collapsed. It was hard for them to be affected by their injuries, so it was easy for them to dodge the attack. However, Fairchild's expression changed a bit when he saw the ripples in the void. Withdraw. Fairchild's words were directed at Luo Nan. He and Baze did not move. After the logic world was established, mental senses could not enter and exit. If a living person wanted to leave, they would need to obtain the permission of Ouyang Chen, the creator of the logic world, or they would need to forcefully break through the spatial barrier. The latter would undoubtedly shake the foundation of the logic world's existence and accelerate the collapse of the logic world. It was just like what the demon was doing. Under normal circumstances, all Fairchild needed to do was give Ouyang Chen a heads up if he wanted to leave. However, it was unknown how much control Ouyang Chen had over the logic world right now. The degree of damage to the logic world had far exceeded the normal limits. It was like a scrapped machine. No matter how superior its performance was in the past, once a critical part of it was damaged, it would be extremely difficult to start it up again. This was something that Ouyang Chen would have found hard to imagine before he created it. As for Luo Nan, he did not respond to Fairchild's call. He did not retreat either. It was not that he did not want to listen. It was that he did not dare. Fairchild saw the limits of the material plane, but Luo Nan saw the even more chaotic mental plane. At the very least, the warped spatial structure could still be used on the material plane of the logic world. However, on the mental plane, various critical structures had already begun to collapse. One warped curtain after another locked to the material plane. They bounced and drifted in retaliation. They intertwined with each other, turning the mental plane, especially the deep regions, into a mess. Luo Nan really did not dare to rashly charge in. From the results of his clairvoyance, the stability of the logic world had suffered irreversible damage after the demon's attack. The curtain structure of the mental plane had completely degenerated into a labyrinth trap. It was like hundreds and thousands of tape measures had been stretched out and woven into bizarre loops. If a soul body were to enter and exit, a single mishap would cause him to be lost in the endless depths of space. Even if he came out alive, only the heavens knew where he would be thrown to. A few dozen kilometers or 100 kilometers was fine, but what if it was 1,000 kilometers or 10,000 kilometers? The bottom of the ocean? The boundless space. Chapter 258. In the warped deep space, the energy and information radiated by the deformed structure of the logic world. If forcefully analyzed, it would be equivalent to the sound of snapping. The situation on the mental plane grew more and more complicated. Luo Nan did not listen to Fairchild's suggestion and quickly left, but he intercepted the extension of his mental senses. He did not go deeper and attempted to retract it. It was only now that he realized that the demon's venting was actually an opportunity to escape. After the structure of the logic world collapsed, the plane it was on became a curtain that had already been unhooked. It was a rapidly retracted tape measure. It severed its connection with the logic world and headed into deep space. In this way, An Weng, who had been paying close attention to Luo Nan, had no choice but to make a choice. Actually, it was not really a choice. The heart of the cocoon of light attached to the foundation of the demon's power would certainly leave with it. The red-hot longsword style of attention was finally shifted away. Luo Nan's mind involuntarily relaxed, but he soon discovered that he had relaxed too early. The demon had left. An Weng had left. The familiar yet unfamiliar vibrating sound grew clearer and clearer. It caused the heavily chained crow to sway a bit more than it should have. The resonance continued. The heavily chained crow was affected by the distant information. Even though Luo Nan had deliberately distanced himself from the matter, the resonant pull still kept him on this plane. It hooked his consciousness and drew him closer. Luo Nan's mind was a bit absent-minded. The pulling connection had more or less injected some energy and information fragments. After being analyzed, they became blurry images. It was as if he was in a dream. Due to the disparity in his analytical abilities, Luo Nan was not sure what he saw. At this time, a vibration was transmitted to him on the mental plane. It was a message from Ouyang Chen. The president locked onto the position of the plane and chased after him. This was the first time Luo Nan personally experienced the mental senses of an extraordinary. There was no pressure at all. Only the purest of information was transmitted over. An effective division of labor is more important than working overtime. Huh? Before Luo Nan could truly understand what was going on, his mind was shaken. He felt an astonishing storm set off on the mental plane. A powerful force, coming from an unknown source, swept over with a rumble. The great wind blew, and the light swayed. The range and level it covered was extremely vast. The star river scene drawn by Luo Nan instantly turned blurry. The sudden assault of the storm should have affected Luo Nan a step further, but Ouyang Chen's intent was here. An invisible protective wall was erected, blocking the follow-up attack. The problem was that under the influence of this, the mental plane, which was not peaceful in the first place, became even more chaotic. Curtains and tape measures flew everywhere. The specific location of the demon and Wang was immediately drowned in the chaotic flow of information. It was difficult to grasp. This was a cover. Luo Nan immediately made a preliminary judgment. This sudden storm had come far too coincidentally. It was hard for one not to suspect the intentions behind it. Who did it? Did the Order of Justice still have hidden experts in Xia City? Guild Master. They should be here soon. Luo Nan's thoughts were completely known to Ouyang Chen through communication on the mental plane. Ouyang Chen didn't even have the basic fluctuations in his emotions. He gave Luo Nan an evaluation of the sudden change in the situation, then he gave Luo Nan some background information. And Wang, the target he's trying to control, holds a very important secret. Many people and powers are interested in it. I think it's necessary for the association to seize the initiative. If we can lock onto that demon's position, that would be the best. Luo Nan was speechless. How could they lock onto it? The demon had destroyed the logic world, causing chaos. It was unknown where the mental storm came from. It was truly extraordinary to use it to cover the retreat. Even if it was Ouyang Chen, in a short amount of time, another change occurred in the void before Luo Nan could finish his thought. Another force surged up. It was like a tall cliff that suddenly rose up. It suppressed the void, blocking the mental storm that filled the air in the distance. The chaotic situation on the mental plane inexplicably eased up quite a bit in this moment of absent-mindedness. This sort of suppressive ability to go from motion to stillness was much more brilliant than pure destruction. But for some reason, there was a feeling of danger as it suppressed here. It wasn't that it was unstable. Instead, there was an even more powerful and active essence within its majesty. Luo Nan had plenty of experience with mental senses, but this was the first time he had seen the spirit of, I am not the mountain comes and I will. In comparison, Fairchild was far too pure, and Ouyang Chen was calm and low-key from beginning to end. Their characteristics were not as distinct and unforgettable as this person. Who was this person? It looked like he was on their side. Why didn't he make a move when the situation was better just now? Luo Nan muttered to himself, but Ouyang Chen was not the least bit surprised. He just transmitted a new thought over. I was thrown too far just now. I don't have enough strength to lock onto the demon's position. I need you to help me confirm. Ouyang Chen magnanimously admitted that Luo Nan was more outstanding than him in terms of tracking and sensing on the mental plane. Ouyang Chen admitted it, but Luo Nan found it a bit hard to accept. I didn't lock onto it. The only thing Luo Nan could confirm right now was that the demon's position was in the extreme depths of the mental plane. The construction of the logic world distorted the curtain, causing it to approach the material plane. This gave the demon the opportunity to appear. Right now, the structure of the logic world had collapsed, and the curtain had returned to its original position. This was the time of upheaval, and they interacted with each other. It was simply like the scattered pages of a book dancing in the gale. The difficulty of finding the demon and Wang right now was equivalent to locking onto a page of a book and searching for a single stroke error amidst the densely packed words. Just thinking about this project made Luo Nan feel a chill run down his back. He didn't have a back to chill for the time being. Ouyang Chen was very clear about the difficulty of this matter. He had no intention of pressuring Luo Nan. A general direction is fine. You can combine it with this diagram. It was still pure information that cut in, but this time the amount was much greater. It made Luo Nan a bit dizzy. The information that seeped in was just as Ouyang Chen said. It was similar to an image, but it was far too complex. A one-way view and a three-dimensional diagram were no longer able to represent it. After the analysis was done, it was like Luo Nan was stuffed into an immersion device, allowing him to personally experience the complexity and richness of the image. This was the benefit of communicating on the mental plane. Luo Nan soon understood that this was the structural design diagram of the logic world. After combing out the general outline, Luo Nan felt at first glance that the structural model of the logic world was like a thick sponge cushion. It surrounded everything in all directions. There were 3 to 4 layers stacked inside and outside, and then they pressed down together from the outermost layer. Luo Nan could represent the material plane, while the sponge cushion represented the mental plane. The higher levels of the mental plane exerted force, forcefully distorting the overlapping layers of structure. This caused the extremely distant mental plane to tear apart the barrier in the middle, directly interfering with the material plane. That was probably how it was. Luo Nan finally understood the basic method of constructing the logic world. Of course, it was absolutely not easy to accomplish this. It was impossible to do without the power of an extraordinary. Plus, how many layers of sponge cushions? Was there a problem with the thickness? Luo Nan could sense that the mental plane was also a multi-layered structure, but the description of 1,000 layers of curtains should be more accurate. The deeper he went into the mental plane, the more intense this feeling became. Either the layers overlapped, or they floated here and there. Oh, it should be a simplified model. How could the difficulty of calculating the deformation of just 3 to 5 layers be the same as calculating the deformation of hundreds to thousands of layers? Even if Ouyang Chen could calculate it, Luo Nan probably wouldn't be able to receive it. Luo Nan found a reasonable explanation, and his mind calmed down quite a bit. Since he was going to start with this model, the slightest difference would lead to a deviation of 1,000 miles. There was no hope for precision. He thought for a bit and drew a circle with his mind on this image. This was the area he felt was the most suitable. With this circle, he felt that there were at least 100 curtains that needed to be sorted out and confirmed. If the target curtains just happened to flutter a bit during this period of time, wasting all his previous efforts would be the only outcome. After drawing the circle, Luo Nan felt more and more unreliable. However, Ouyang Chen was quite satisfied with Luo Nan's answer. The direction is very convincing. We can give it a try. If it doesn't work, then we can study it again. But just as the thought arose, the turbulence on the mental plane, which had already subsided somewhat, suddenly became intense once more. The one who had provided cover for N1 had repeatedly attacked the suppression cliff to no avail. He switched to a different method. He began to jump back and forth in various areas of the mental plane. Sometimes, he even touched upon the material plane. He stirred the clouds and gave rise to waves. He directly affected the existence of the logic world. Everyone could see that the complete collapse of the logic world was only a matter of time. Ouyang Chen did not say anything else. He did not consult Luo Nan for his opinion either. He changed the portion of power that protected Luo Nan's mental senses a bit, sending the mental senses of this publicly acknowledged troublemaker out of the logic world. By the time Luo Nan came back to his senses, his soul body was floating outside the conjoined buildings of the real world. The main body of Frost River reality, which had been smashed to pieces in the logic world, was still safely and unscathed within the darkness. On the other hand, Luo Nan's Star River diagram was growing more and more chaotic. It was only at this time that Luo Nan discovered that the clash between the two powerful individuals was not limited to the logic world. Their powers possessed astonishing penetrative power and stability. They forcefully broke through the barriers of the logic world and transmitted their attacks to this plane. Even though Luo Nan's mental senses were completely powerless, the construction of his life sketches was truly affected. The pressure increased greatly. Luo Nan did not need to think too much. He began to rapidly shrink the range of his senses. From his perspective, this was something that could be done with a single thought. But soon, he felt that something was wrong. The Star River diagram was a combination of life sketches. It was equivalent to a drawing that Luo Nan had personally drawn. This thing could not be withdrawn or deleted just because he wanted to. The corresponding information had already been deeply engraved in his mind. It had a real and tangible effect on Luo Nan. On the mental plane, information and energy were interconnected. When the range of his senses expanded out, it was nothing more than this. But when it suddenly contracted, the complex information could be compressed. The corresponding energy converged into a flood and brushed past Luo Nan's soul body. Whether it was his soul or his main body that was over a dozen kilometers away, all of them trembled. Luo Nan was no stranger to this feeling. Every time the sacrificial ritual was completed within the altar frame, every time the wraith sign obtained a great harvest from its hunt, the corresponding feedback would always arrive. His soul was growing stronger, and trouble followed him like a shadow. This time, it seemed to be a bit bigger. In the past, the endurance of his soul body had yet to reach its peak. But this time, it was completely different. The range of his senses had shrunk by less than half. The swelling, exploding, and dizziness were endlessly magnified. This caused the gathering and operation of energy and information to show signs of losing control. What was even worse was that the two powerful individuals were clashing on the mental plane right now. Large amounts of useful and useless energy and information were stuffed in. His soul body had reached its limit. Or could it be said that the operating structure of energy and information, the amount of energy and information that the soul configuration could handle, had finally reached its limit? This loss of control caused the boundaries of the large amounts of information to blur and muddle together. Which was his self-awareness? Which were the insignificant memories and impressions on the periphery? These things were needed together. They interfered and influenced each other. It seemed that they would soon be unable to operate. No, this absolutely could not happen. Luo Nan knew that he could not continue like this. He needed a buffer, a flood outlet. He couldn't think of anything else right now. He could only rely on his previous successful experience. The external neuron. A bolt of lightning pierced his mind. Luo Nan's body bounced up and fell back down within the car. He began to convulse on the brink of death. The numbers of the instruments on the scene rose and fell violently. They didn't go all the way down. Instead, they jumped back and forth, each one off the charts. It was as if they had fallen into a powerful magnetic field. They no longer had any value as a reference. Everyone in the car, from Bai Xinyan to Zhang Yingying, from Shui Lei to Red Fox, Cat Eyes, and Papercut, were indescribably shocked. Rustling sounds rang in the ears of several members of the society at this time. The psychic wave network, which had stopped functioning for some time, began to restore communications. It was just that the first wave of information was quite strange. Amidst the rustling noise that was like the rise and fall of a tide, thoughts that opposed each other with equal harshness materialized into cold and hard words. All those who profane the holy object are to be purged by the order. Then let the war begin. The leisurely and unhurried reply was like a gentle breeze brushing past the ears. But the inner meaning of the words, as well as the corresponding strength and identity, made the members of the society look at each other in dismay. Then everyone turned their gazes to a single person at practically the same time. What the hell is your boss doing? Zhang Yingying spread her hands. She was rarely speechless. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.